Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The pain radiated from every part of my body as I lay there, the steady beep of a machine piercing the fog that surrounded my thoughts. Slowly, it dawned on me. I was in a hospital. Judging by the level of pain, something terrible had happened. Disoriented, I tried to piece together the last thing I could remember, but my mind was a blank canvas. It felt like trying to grasp smoke. I had no idea what had happened to put me in this bed, but I figured I'd start with the basics. What year was it? 1969. Who was president? Nixon. What was my name? John Stapleton. How old was I? 49. Those details came to me easily, but the rest? Nothing. My body screamed at me with every shallow breath, but the emptiness in my mind was even more unnerving. What had happened to me? Why was I here? And why couldn't I remember? Okay, I have some basic parameters in place which meant my mind was still working. Now let's try some recall. What memories could I pull up? As I lay there, I saw mental flashes of my brother Jack and me during the Depression gathering coal that had fallen from the trains so that we could have heat during the winter. I remember my paper route and the fact that my family was so poor during the Depression that all the money my brother and I made we turned over to our mother, just so we could put food on the table. My mind continued to flash pictures, and I recalled that we were having dinner when we found out Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I also recalled enlisting in the Army on January 2nd, 1942. I was 22. Memories started cascading from my mind at that point. Basic training in Louisiana, shipping over to England, more training, and then June 6, 1944. I was a sergeant by then in charge of a squad. The beach was my first real taste of combat, and I wished with all my might that it would have been my last. Most of us made it through that day, but in the following months, I lost all of my original squad except Jack Murphy, a farmer with a wife and 2 kids from Pennsylvania. Jack was my best friend and more like a brother to me than even my own flesh and blood. We fought through the hedgerows in Normandy, at the Saint-Lô breakout, and all across France. With each guy we lost Jack and I drew closer together. We thought that we might just get through the war safe and sound, but then came the Huertigan Forest. During the winter of 44, we came up against a well-entrenched and still dangerous enemy. The woods were treacherous and the body count began to rise as we pushed our way through. We had felt before the Huertigan that the war was nearly won, but the Germans soon debased us of that notion. Our battle was eclipsed by events in the Bulge where Hitler had managed a powerful counterattack, but the Huertigan was every bit as desperate and deadly. In the 90 days that the battle lasted, the U.S. Army had about 24,000 combat casualties, with another 9,000 men suffering trench foot or exhaustion, so that had to be pulled from the line. My ward changed just before Christmas of 1944. My squad was sent to recon an area in front of our lines to determine enemy positions and firepower. It was felt at G2 that the Germans might have been pulling back, and they needed to know. My 7 men, including me, set out to scout the line in the early hours of December 20th. We had gone nearly a quarter of a mile and were spread out when the early morning was shattered by a loud bang as an MG-42 spit out 1,200 rounds per minute. My men hit the ground, but I noticed that Murphy had fairly been cut in two by the Kraut machine gun. I called out as loudly as I could, "Keep down and give me suppressing fire." With the rest of the squad pumping lead in the direction of the gun, I moved out to the right hoping to outflank it. The problem with outflanking is that you never know how many men the enemy has on their flanks, or where they might have another heavy weapons emplacement for covering fire. This morning, I got lucky. I soon found they had only one flanker, and he was an old man, a leftover from the First World War judging by the medals he was wearing. He never knew what hit him as I squeezed off a round from my Garand and dropped him. I moved up on the gun, which was still spraying lead at my men, and lobbed a grenade into the pit. The sound was loud in the crisp winter air, and I moved up to ensure that the crew was dead. As I watched, one soldier stirred and moved with a look of fear creeping over his face when I jumped into the pit. I was not in my right mind, as I now only wanted a little payback for my best friend's life. The Kraut was wounded, but not too badly, and called out gently, "Hilf." He must have seen something horrible in my face as he began to squirm in an effort to escape from me. I just looked at him and thought, this bastard killed my friend? His eyes grew wide with fear as I pointed my Garand at his face, and in a pleading voice he kept saying, "Neen, Neen." Finally, he must have realized the futility of what he was saying as his face took on a calmer look, even though the fear was still evident, and in a quiet, calm voice simply said, "Warham?" It was the last thing he ever said as I pulled the trigger, sending a 30.06 round through his skull. When I shot, I seemed to come to my senses again, as I realized the kid I shot couldn't have been no more than 16. I rifled through his pockets and found his sold butch, which contained all his personal information. Much to my dismay, the kid had been in the army only 10 days. In late 44, the Germans were hoping that all the training the Hitler Youth gave them would suffice to stop the enemy. When one of my men, Kaminsky, came up to the gun trench, I remembered he spoke some German. Without looking at him, I asked, "Ski, what does Warum mean in German?" His answer would haunt me for the rest of my life when he flatly replied, "It means why." The war ended for me a month later when I got shrapnel in my leg, which took me out of combat. I left the battlefield, but the battlefield never left me. I came home in 45 with some souvenirs of the war and a permanent limp. My family had arranged a welcome home party for me, and that's where I met Becky, my future wife. Becky had worked with my brother at Curtiss-Wright Aircraft during the war, and they had become friends. They had dated, but they seemed to lack the spark that transforms friends into lovers. It was definitely not that way for us, as I hit it off with her immediately. Becky was what I needed, young, beautiful, and full of life. When I looked into her sparkling green eyes, I felt that all my sins had been forgiven. I wanted her to be with me till I died, and I asked her to marry me 1 month to the day after I met her. To my great joy and surprise, she agreed. Time moved quickly, and I was discharged from the army, newly married and moving up in the world. I got a job expediting orders at Bethlehem Steel and became a productive member of society. The only problem I had was the dreams I could not shake. That kid in the forest and the word Warum plagued me. I felt guilty over the fact that I had murdered a boy, but I never spoke of it and kept it bottled up inside of me. In 1947, we had our first and only child, a boy we named Jack after my friend, Jack Murphy, who died in the Huertigan forest. Over the years, the one thing that my both wife and son learned was to not ask me about the war. I wouldn't talk about it because I couldn't. I never let them know what hell was like and hoped they would never find out themselves. Jack grew up to be a strapping young man who wanted to get into the military in the worst way. I told him not to join the army as Vietnam was going strong by 1966. However, just like me, he didn't listen and became a chopper pilot. He died in combat during the Tet Offensive in 1968. With our son's death, my marriage seemed to decay. Becky withdrew from me, and I could not get her to let me back into her life. Somehow I think she blamed me for Jack's death, as I had never tried to stop our son from enlisting. Her contention was that by me not telling our boy about the war, I had inspired him to enlist to find out for himself. She would continually snap at me, and civil words between us became a rare thing indeed. I knew that she was grieving for her lost son, but so was I. Blaming me for his death was lubricious, but there was no stopping it. We both needed each other, but instead we were both intent in driving the other away. Nearly a year went by, and still we were antagonistic to each other. The only normalcy in my world by then was my job, and then it went away. In the summer of 1969, my department was eliminated by Beth Steel. I was given a severance pay for my 24 years of loyal service and simply let go. That day, I came home early for the first time since we had been married. When I walked into the house, I expected Becky to be shocked, but instead it was me who was shocked as I heard the sound of passion emanating from our bedroom. As I walked down the hall, I felt a white-hot anger building in me that I had not felt since Murphy's death in 44. When I looked in the bedroom, my eyes were assaulted by the vision of my naked wife in bed with the next-door neighbor's son who was home from college. She was calling out God's name, but somehow I didn't think she was praying. Without thinking, I turned from the deceitful scene I was witnessing and went to the garage. Finding the trunk I had bought after the war to store my army mementos in, I brought it down from its perch and put it on the floor. Even though I had not looked in the trunk since 46, I still kept the key on my key ring, and with quivering hands unlocked it. Pulling up my old uniform, I found it wrapped in a German flag, a P-38 pistol. Along with the gun, I found its clip, and even the original 8 rounds that had been in the weapon when I took it from a German officer I had shot. Loading the rounds in the clip, I slipped it into the grip and pulled the slide back. Walking back through the house, the sounds had gotten louder, if anything, and by the time I was stepping inside of my bedroom, I was greeted by the sight of my wife and her lover. They were both oblivious to me until I hit the lever that allowed the slide on the P-38 to slam home with a resounding click. The noise from the gun echoed loudly in the bedroom, and they both stopped and looked over at me. The boy fell out of my wife as he rolled over onto his back with a frightened look on his face. Becky was also shocked, but I think it was at the expression on my face as I moved quickly around the bed and brought the pistol up to the boy's face. Becky was screaming, "Stop!" But it was too late. I felt my finger tightening on the trigger, and with a rage inside of me, I was going to end this whole charade. It was then that I looked into his eyes, and they were the same as that German kid I shot in 44. In that minute, I knew I would not kill again, and with a slow final gesture, I brought the gun down and away from his face. The room was absolutely silent as I said in a sad voice, looking over to my wife, "Warren?" Not expecting any answer, I turned and let the gun drop to the floor as I left the house. As I was leaving, the boy broke into tears and Becky was calling my name, but I just didn't care anymore. I walked out and got into my car, and without a backward glance left my life behind. Somehow in my days, I returned to the one place where years ago I felt hope for my future. It was a bar in the northern section of town with the grand name of the Excelsior. When I had gotten off the train returning home in 45, a group of us, discharged soldiers, stopped in to have a beer. I remember how life seemed to be limitless for us because the war was over. We all had hopes and dreams then. Now mine were pretty much shattered. In 1969, the train station was long gone, but the bar still remained. The neighborhood had become disreputable and downtrodden, but almost on autopilot I went into the bar. The decor and clientele had changed greatly since the 40s, but the solid wooden bar was still the same. Feeling like I had found an old friend, I sat and ordered a beer. The beer became 2, and then 3 as I sat and tried to figure out where my life had gone. I had lost everything: my friend, my son, my job, and now my wife. By the time the bar was closing, I was feeling no pain, but I was not in a good mental place. As I staggered from the bar, I noticed a movement in the shadows as someone approached me. As I looked up, it was a young man holding a gun on me. His voice was nervous and clipped when he said, "Give me your money, old man. Now." I looked from the gun to his face and replied, "No." Somewhere in my drunken mind, I had determined that I had had enough. First it was the army telling me what to do, then my employer, then my wife, and now this punk. No, now it was time to make my own destiny, and since I no longer really cared what that was, it was easy for me to refuse him. The fact is, you are only scared if you have something to lose, and since I had already lost it all, I had no fear. The punk was confused but obstinate. "Give me your money now, old man, or die." I only smiled at him, which seemed to disconcert him even more. "Go ahead, kid. Pull the trigger." The panic was evident in his voice as he ordered me again. "You think I'm messing with you, a hole? Give me the money." I shook my head no and replied in a flat monotone, "Screw you." The explosion was loud and bright, and the pain inside of my body felt like my organs had spontaneously combusted into flame. Mercifully, the pain was brief as it was quickly replaced by darkness as I felt myself sagging down onto the street with the life draining from my body. And that brought me back to the hospital room and its beeping monitor and searing pain. Apparently, I had not died, and in fact, from the amount of pain I was enduring, I was very much alive. I wanted to open my eyes, but seemed unable to accomplish the task. I was feeling myself starting to slip into that dark pit again when I felt a soft caress to my face and a voice that was familiar to me whispering in my ear, "Please come back to me, John. I'm so sorry. I was messed up in my mind, darling." I was lonely and flattered by his attention and let myself be coerced, but I never meant it to turn out this way. "I love you, my husband, and always will. We have lost so much, John. Don't let us lose each other. Come back to me, my love, and give me a second chance. I know now just how much you mean to me." At this point, I felt warm water on my cheek and the sounds of Becky's sobbing echoing in my mind. I tried hard to pull myself up from that dark pit wanting to take me down, and with a great effort managed to open my eyes to find Becky's face very close to mine. At first, she seemed unable to comprehend that I was looking at her, but then she jumped up and started screaming for the doctor. Within a few hours and close observation by the nurses, I seemed to stabilize, and the chances of relapsing back into a coma were remote. Finally, when all the action died down, we were alone, and Becky came over and hugged my face to hers, apologizing again for her actions and blaming me for our son's death. I was still mad at her, but I also still loved her and didn't want to lose her. We really talked for the first time since our son's death and discovered things about each other we didn't know. I finally opened up about the war and the things that I did and the demons that still plagued me. Becky told me about her grief and how lost she felt, and finally how she needed someone to blame for his death and wrongly lashed out at me. She also told me about the boy she had made love to, how he had been at home for the summer and came on to her when her self-esteem was at its lowest. He had seduced her, and knowingly she had allowed herself to be taken. She really seemed conflicted by what had happened, and it scared her. I was still mad at her for allowing herself to fall under his spell, but I had already begun the process of forgiving her. We shared a long marriage and the death of a son. We needed each other for support and had both forgotten that. By the time she had to go home, we both realized that we still belonged together, and that was where we had to start rebuilding from. When I got home from the hospital, she had redone our bedroom so that it was nothing like when I had found them together. We healed and moved on, and life did get better. I managed to get a job again working for an insurance agency in the spring of 1970, and we developed a new appreciation for each other. Forgiving and forgetting came hard, but we both achieved it, and our love held us together. Nobody knows how much time we have on this earth, and nobody should spend that time in the useless pursuit of anger and revenge. My wife and I moved on and had a pretty good life together after that. Did we fight? Definitely. Did we have relapses? Yes. Sometimes when you least expected it, the memories all came back and the anger with it. However, just like a fire, it had to be put out and forgotten. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The metallic clang of surgical instruments echoed through Operating Room 3 at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Abraham Wilkins stood over his patient, his gloved hands steady as they had been for the past 23 years of performing cardiothoracic surgeries. BP's dropping, Dr. Wilkins, the anesthesiologist announced. Abraham's eyes remained fixed on the exposed heart before him. Increase the dopamine drip. Let's get that pressure up. His movements were precise, calculated, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside his mind. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, assisting on the other side of the table, noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. She had worked alongside Abraham long enough to read the subtle signs others might miss. 3 hours later, as they scrubbed out, Lourdes broke the silence. That was close in there. We got it done, Abraham replied, methodically washing his hands. Your hands were steady as always, Abe, but your mind was somewhere else. Lourdes dried her hands, studying his reflection in the steel sink. Coffee. In the doctor's lounge, Abraham stared into his cup of black coffee, the events from last night's parent-teacher conference replaying in his mind. 24 hours earlier, the hallways of Westbrook Academy buzzed with activity as parents moved from classroom to classroom. Abraham adjusted his tie, having come straight from the hospital. Rebecca should have been there, but another yoga class had taken priority. Pete Wiggins's classroom smelled of chalk dust and teenage anxiety. The AP chemistry teacher's desk was cluttered with graded papers and half-empty coffee cups. Posters of the periodic table and molecular structures decorated the walls. Dr. Wilkins. Pete's handshake was firm, his smile too familiar. Caitlin's one of our brightest students. She definitely inherited those brains from somewhere. Thank you. Rebecca and I are proud of her dedication. Pete's expression shifted slightly at Rebecca's name. Ah yes, Mrs. Wilkins mentioned during book club that she's been helping Caitlin with her chemistry studies. Abraham's physician's intuition, honed by decades of reading subtle symptoms, picked up on something in Pete's tone. Book club? Oh yes. Pete shuffled some papers on his desk. The one that meets during my free periods on Thursdays. Your wife's quite the literature enthusiast. Rebecca had told him she attended yoga classes on Thursdays. Back in the present, Lourdes' voice cut through his thoughts. Earth to Abraham. Sorry. He set down his coffee. Just thinking about something Pete Wiggins said at parent-teacher conferences. The chemistry teacher Caitlin's always talking about? The same. Abraham leaned back, his surgical scrubs crinkling. Did you know Rebecca's apparently in a book club that meets during his free periods? I thought she did yoga on Thursdays. So did I. The silence between them spoke volumes. Clark Sheridan's office was exactly what you'd expect from a former FBI agent turned private investigator. Functional, organized, and completely unremarkable. The man himself matched his surroundings. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that was practical rather than fashionable. Tell me everything, Clark said, his notebook open and pen poised. Abraham recounted the inconsistencies he'd noticed. Rebecca's changing schedules, the book club that conflicted with supposed yoga classes, Pete Wiggins's oddly intimate knowledge of his wife's activities. Clark made notes in precise, economical strokes. How long has your daughter been at Westbrook? Since freshman year. 3 years now. And when did the yoga classes start? Abraham frowned. Around the same time. Clark nodded, his expression neutral. I'll need a few days to establish surveillance and basic background checks. In the meantime, maintain your normal routine. Don't give any indication that you suspect anything. A week later, Clark's preliminary report lay on Abraham's desk at the hospital. Rebecca's yoga studio had no record of her membership. The book club she claimed to attend didn't exist, at least not officially. Dr. Wilkins? His office door opened, revealing Janet, one of the nurses. Your 3 o'clock valve replacement was canceled. The patient's blood work wasn't optimal. Abraham nodded, quickly sliding the report into his drawer. Thank you, Janet. Could you ask Dr. Mansfield to stop by when she has a moment? Later that afternoon, Lurd perched on the edge of his office chair, reading Clark's findings. Jesus, Abe. There's more. He handed her a business card. Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian reached out to Clark yesterday. What did she say? She's been keeping records. Security footage, sign-in sheets, patterns of behavior. Apparently, Pete has a history of close relationships with students' mothers. Lord set down the report. Have you talked to Rebecca? Not yet. Clark's gathering more evidence. He says I need to be strategic about this. What about Caitlin? Abraham's face tightened. That's complicated. There are some medical markers in her blood work that never quite made sense. I've always dismissed it, but now, you think. I don't know what to think anymore. The next week passed in a blur of surgeries, surveillance updates, and sleepless nights. Clark's investigation produced a steady stream of evidence. Credit card statements showing purchases at times and places that contradicted Rebecca's stories, security footage from Westbrook Academy showing her car in the parking lot during Pete's free periods, and finally, the damning testimony from Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian sat across from Abraham in Clark's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I should have said something sooner, but without proof. Tell him what you saw last Thursday, Clark prompted. Wendy pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up a video. I stay late most days, cataloging new acquisitions. My office overlooks the science wing. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Rebecca, entering Pete's classroom after hours. The lights dimming. No one emerging for over an hour. There's more, Clark said quietly. Going back 3 years, Abraham's world tilted on its axis. 3 years. Since Caitlin started at Westbrook, the DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday. Abraham stared at the numbers and percentages that demolished 18 years of fatherhood. His office at Metropolitan General had never felt more sterile, more cold. The drive home that evening was a blur. He barely registered the familiar streets of their upscale neighborhood, the manicured lawns of Oakwood, or the Tudor-style home he had purchased when Caitlin was born. All he could see were the numbers on that report. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Caitlin's debate practice wouldn't end for another hour, or so he thought. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with practiced precision. She looked up, smiling. You're home early. Rough day? You could say that. His voice sounded strange to his own ears. We need to talk, Rebecca. She set down the knife. What's wrong? Where were you last Thursday afternoon? Yoga class, you know that? Really? Because I have security footage of you entering Pete Wiggins's classroom at 3:45 p.m. The color drained from Rebecca's face. Abe. 3 years, Rebecca. 3 years of lies. It's not what you think. Don't. His hand slammed down on the counter, making the knife rattle. Don't you dare try to explain this away. I have everything. The false yoga classes, the non-existent book club, the money you've been funneling to him. You had me investigated? Her shock turned to anger. How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? 18 years of marriage, Rebecca. 18 years, and Caitlin isn't even mine. The sound of a backpack hitting the floor made them both turn. Caitlin stood in the doorway, her debate team uniform still pristine, her face a mask of horror. Practice ended early, she whispered. Caitlin, honey, Rebecca started. Get out, Abraham said quietly. What? Both Rebecca and Caitlin spoke simultaneously. Get out of my house, Rebecca. Now. Caitlin stepped between them. You can't kick her out. This is her home too. Caitlin, please. Rebecca reached for her daughter. No. Caitlin's voice rose. How dare you kick Mom out of the house, just over a tiny affair? Abraham's laugh was hollow. A tiny affair? With your teacher? The man who, as it turns out, is your biological father. The silence that followed was deafening. You're lying, Caitlin whispered. Abraham walked to his office, retrieved the DNA test results, and returned. He handed them to Caitlin with surgical precision. I'm a doctor, Caitlin. These numbers don't lie. Tears streamed down Caitlin's face as she read. This can't be true. Ask your mother. Rebecca's silence was answer enough. If you won't let her back in the house, Caitlin crumpled the papers. You're no longer my dad. I never was. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Go pack your things, both of you. I want you out tonight. Abe, please, Rebecca tried one last time. We can talk about this. There's nothing to talk about. You can contact my lawyer tomorrow. He turned away, his voice clinical, detached. You know what? Go and live with your mom on the streets. Get out from here. The sound of their footsteps on the stairs, of drawers being yanked open and clothes being stuffed into bags, of muffled sobs and angry whispers, filled the house. Abraham stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the half-chopped vegetables and shattered remnants of his life. Later that night, after they had gone, Abraham sat in his dark office at home. The house echoed with emptiness. On his desk, family photos seemed to mock him, vacation snapshots, graduation ceremonies, holiday portraits. 18 years of memories, all built on lies. His phone buzzed. A text from Lourdes. Do you need company? He stared at the message for a long moment before responding. Not tonight. Surgery at 7 a.m. tomorrow. Setting the phone down, Abraham looked at the DNA test results one last time before filing them away. Tomorrow, he would call Barry Hahn and start the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling the life he thought he had. But tonight, in the darkness of his office, Dr. Abraham Wilkins allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. The steady hands that had saved countless lives trembled as he poured himself a drink, and for the first time in decades, he wept. Barry Hahn's corner office overlooked the city courthouse, a view he'd earned through 20 years of prosecuting the worst kinds of betrayal. The former prosecutor studied the DNA test results and surveillance photos spread across his mahogany desk. They're not wasting any time, Barry said, sliding a legal notice across to Abraham. Marcy King filed the divorce petition this morning. She's demanding immediate spousal support and exclusive use of the house. Abraham's fingers tightened on his coffee cup. The house I bought before we were married? Marcy's aggressive, but she's not subtle. Barry leaned back, his chair creaking. She's built her career bleeding men like you dry. Successful professionals who can't afford public scandal. I won't be blackmailed. Good. Barry pulled out a thick folder. Because our forensic accountant found something interesting in your joint accounts, the numbers told a story more sordid than even Abraham had imagined. Regular transfers to an offshore account, carefully disguised as charitable donations. Credit card statements showing expensive gifts. Hotel charges in neighboring cities. How much? Abraham asked. Close to $500,000 over the past 3 years. Barry highlighted several transactions. Most of it coincides with Pete Wiggins's known gambling debts. A knock interrupted them. Barry's secretary entered with another stack of documents. The subpoenas for Westbrook Academy's records just came through. Perfect. Barry turned to Abraham. Ready to go on offense? What's our strategy? We hit them with everything. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, alienation of affection. And once we expose Pete's gambling debts, Rebecca's lawyer will have to shift from offense to damage control. Abraham stared out at the courthouse. And Caitlin? Barry's expression softened slightly. She's 17, almost legally an adult. The courts will consider her preference, but given the circumstances, I don't want her money, or her time. Abraham stood. I just want the truth on record. Across town, in Marcy King's significantly more modern office, Rebecca sat with perfect posture, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. He's not playing fair, Rebecca insisted. Using private investigators, DNA tests, it's harassment. Marcy, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, typed rapidly on her laptop. It's legal discovery, and he's within his rights. What concerns me are these financial transfers. I was helping a friend in need. A friend who happened to be having an affair with you? Marcy's fingers stopped moving. A friend who's the biological father of your daughter? Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. You don't understand. No, you don't understand. Marcy closed her laptop. Your husband's lawyer was a prosecutor. He's building a criminal case, not just a divorce filing. Those transfers weren't just betrayal. They were fraud. But the prenup becomes void if criminal activity is proven. Marcy's voice hardened. Tell me everything about Pete's gambling. Now. Headmaster Wilson Daly's office at Westbrook Academy radiated old-world privilege. Oak paneling, leather chairs, and generations of alumni photographs created an atmosphere of unshakable tradition. But today, that tradition was trembling. This can't go public, Wilson insisted, his bow tie slightly askew. The reputation of the school? Wendy Bartlett's voice shook with anger. What about the reputation of every student whose mother Pete Wiggins targeted? Now, Ms. Bartlett, I have documentation going back 3 years. Wendy placed a USB drive on his desk. Security footage, email correspondence, complaints from other staff members that were lost in the system. Wilson's face reddened. Those files are school property, and I've already shared copies with Jamie Goldstein at the Herald. The name of the investigative reporter made Wilson collapse back into his chair. You didn't. She's running the story next week. Wendy stood. Unless you do the right thing. Fire Pete. Launch a formal investigation. Make this right. Before Wilson could respond, his phone buzzed. His secretary's voice trembled. Sir, there are police officers here with a warrant. And a news crew in the parking lot. Jamie Goldstein stood in front of the school's iconic brick facade, her red hair bright against the gathering storm clouds. Her cameraman adjusted the frame as she reviewed her notes. Westbrook Academy, the prestigious private school that has educated the city's elite for over a century, faces allegations of misconduct and cover-ups. Multiple sources within the school have provided evidence of inappropriate relationships between a teacher and students' mothers, along with financial irregularities involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Parents gathered at the edges of the shot, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. A police car pulled up, and 2 detectives emerged with boxes of seized documents. Inside, Pete Wiggins sat in the chemistry lab for the last time, watching through the window as his career imploded. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. They know about the money. All of it. His hands shook as he opened his desk drawer, pulling out a letter of resignation he'd prepared weeks ago. Too late now. The police would find the gambling debts, the loans, the threats from bookies. And Rebecca would tell them everything to save herself. The lab door opened. Detective Sarah Chin entered, her badge glinting. Mr. Wiggins? We need to talk about some financial transactions. In the library, Wendy Bartlett watched the scene unfold while copying more files. Other teachers began coming forward, the school counselor with notes from concerned students, the janitor with after-hours access logs, the business office staff with questioned expense reports. Ms. Bartlett? A junior reporter from the Herald approached. Can you tell us how long you've been documenting these incidents? Since the first red flag. Wendy looked at the growing crowd outside. Sometimes doing the right thing means burning everything down and starting over. The modest 2-bedroom apartment felt like a prison to Rebecca. No housekeeper, no garden service, no country club membership. Just beige walls and IKEA furniture. We can't live like this, she told Caitlin, who sat curled on the second-hand couch. Your father is destroying us. He's not my father. Caitlin's voice was bitter. You made sure of that. Don't take that tone with me. Rebecca paced the small living room. Everything I did was for us. And now he's trying to ruin everything. My reputation. My future. Your future. What about Pete? Caitlin's question hung in the air. Pete's. Rebecca's voice trailed off. Pete's dealing with his own problems. You mean his gambling debts? The ones you paid with Dad's, with Abraham's money? Rebecca spun to face her daughter. How did you? It's all over school. Caitlin stood, her face flushed. Everyone knows. Do you have any idea what it's like there now? My teacher, my biological father, was sleeping with students' mothers and stealing their money. It wasn't stealing.
It was.
Stop lying. Caitlin grabbed her phone. At least Abraham told me the truth, even when it hurt. Rebecca's expression hardened. Truth? You want truth? Fine. He's trying to destroy us, so we'll destroy him first. She pulled out a notebook. I've kept records of every patient he's lost, every complication in surgery. By the time I'm done, no one will trust him with a paper cut, let alone heart surgery. You're talking about ruining his career. Caitlin's voice shook. People could die if they're afraid to let him operate. He should have thought of that before he threw us out. Before he discovered your lies, you mean? Rebecca ignored her daughter's comment, already typing on her laptop. I've contacted every medical board in the state. Anonymous complaints about drinking before surgery, prescribing unnecessary medications, inappropriate behavior with nurses. None of that is true. It doesn't have to be true. Rebecca's smile was cold. It just has to be loud enough, constant enough, to create doubt. Unless what? Unless he agrees to reinstate us in his will. Give us what we deserve. At Metropolitan General, Abraham sat in Chief of Surgery Troy Calderon's office, surrounded by his colleagues. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield read through the latest batch of complaints. This is ridiculous, Lourdes said. Everyone knows you're the most careful surgeon on staff. You won't even take aspirin during call weeks. Troy Calderon, a commanding presence even seated, nodded. Our lawyers are already preparing responses. Every case Rebecca cited has complete documentation showing standard of care was not just met but exceeded, but the damage is already spreading. Abraham gestured to his significantly lighter surgery schedule. Patients are requesting other surgeons, not your regular patients. Lourdes set down the complaints, not the ones who know you. And the staff is behind you completely. Every nurse, every tech, every resident. They're all willing to sign statements supporting you. Salvatore Bernard, the hospital's lead counsel, entered with a stack of papers. We've got enough for a defamation suit. Multiple counts, provable damages, clear malicious intent. Do it, Abraham said quietly. No settlements, no deals. It'll be public, Troy warned. Messy. Everything's already public. Abraham stood. I've lost my wife, my daughter, and my home. I won't lose my integrity too. Later that night, Abraham sat in his office, reviewing surgical notes for the few cases that remained on his schedule. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Caitlin. Mom's lost it. She's going to destroy everything you've built unless you give her what she wants. I'm sorry. For everything. Abraham stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Through his window, he could see the lights of the hospital chapel where he'd prayed the day Caitlin was born. The day he'd promised to always protect her, always love her. Some promises, he realized, were broken long before they were made. The next morning, Rebecca received a letter from Abraham's lawyers, not offering surrender or compromise, but serving notice of a defamation suit backed by the full power of Metropolitan General Hospital. As she read the detailed documentation dismantling each of her false complaints, her phone buzzed with news that would shatter what remained of her plans. Pete Wiggins had taken a deal with prosecutors. He would testify about everything, the affair, the money, the other mothers, in exchange for leniency. In his hospital office, Abraham prepared for his first surgery of the day, his hands steady as ever. Outside, life went on. Patients needed him. Residents needed teaching, and the truth, slowly but surely, was emerging from the wreckage of lies. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched him scrub in, noting the straight line of his shoulders, the calm focus in his eyes. Ready? Always. Abraham stepped into the OR, leaving the chaos of his personal life outside those sterile doors. Here, in this room, there was only the work, the healing, the truth of what his hands could do. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse's oak-paneled courtroom sat silent as Judge Eleanor Martinez reviewed the final pieces of evidence. Barry Hahn stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, while Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside Marcy King, her designer outfit now months out of style. Your Honor, Barry's voice carried easily through the chamber, we'd like to present evidence of additional financial fraud perpetrated by Mrs. Wilkins and Mr. Wiggins. The projector hummed to life, displaying spreadsheets and bank statements on the courtroom screen. These documents show a pattern of systematic fraud targeting wealthy parents at Westbrook Academy, Barry continued. Mrs. Wilkins didn't just assist Mr. Wiggins with his gambling debts. They worked together to scam other families. Marcy King rose to object, but Rebecca grabbed her arm, shaking her head. Her face had gone pale. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Wilkins, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rebecca's voice trembled. No, Your Honor. Very well. The judge removed her reading glasses. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including proof of financial fraud, infidelity, and deliberate deception regarding paternity, I am granting Dr. Wilkins's petition for divorce. She paused, scanning the courtroom. Furthermore, given Mrs. Wilkins's criminal conduct, I am awarding Dr. Wilkins full ownership of all marital assets. The prenuptial agreement is void due to proven criminal activity. Rebecca slumped in her chair as Judge Martinez continued. Mrs. Wilkins, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Hahn has provided substantial evidence of wire fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. In the gallery, Detective Sarah Chan made notes while two uniformed officers moved closer to the courtroom doors. Your Honor, Marcy began. Your client perpetrated a years-long fraud that went far beyond a simple affair. Judge Martinez's voice hardened. She manipulated not only her husband but an entire school community. The court cannot ignore such calculated deception. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, Abraham sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Barry gathered his papers, speaking softly to his client. Pete Wiggins took a plea deal this morning, Barry said. He's testifying against Rebecca and the gambling syndicate he was involved with. They're looking at serious time. Abraham nodded. And Caitlin? She's 18 now. Legally an adult. Barry hesitated. She's been trying to contact your office. I know. Abraham stood, straightening his tie. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Jamie Goldstein as she delivered her latest update. The divorce proceedings revealed a complex web of deception involving financial fraud at Westbrook Academy. Multiple families have come forward claiming they were targeted by Mr. Wiggins and Mrs. Wilkins. Sources say criminal indictments are pending. 6 months later, Abraham stood in Metropolitan General's teaching amphitheater, demonstrating a new valve replacement technique to a group of residents. His hands moved with practiced precision over the surgical simulator. The key is maintaining steady pressure while you secure the sutures, he explained. 1 millimeter's difference can mean the difference between success and failure. In the front row, Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched with a slight smile. Besides her sat a woman she'd invited to observe, Dr. Letitia Roman, the hospital's new head of pediatric surgery. After the demonstration, Lourdes made the introduction. Abe, meet Dr. Roman. She's revolutionizing our pediatric cardiac program. Letitia's handshake was firm, her dark eyes direct. That was an impressive demonstration, Dr. Wilkins. Though I prefer working with smaller vessels in my tiny patients. Please call me Abraham. He noticed the plain gold band on her right hand, a widow's ring. I'd love to hear about your techniques. Maybe over coffee. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, their conversation flowed naturally from surgical procedures to personal histories. Military service took Jason from me 3 years ago, Letitia said, stirring her coffee. Left me with 2 boys and a lot of questions about what family really means. Abraham nodded. I thought I knew what family meant. 18 years of marriage taught me otherwise. I heard about the scandal. Letitia's voice was gentle but direct. Must have been hard, having your personal life splashed across the headlines. The betrayal was worse than the publicity. Abraham studied his cup. Finding out my daughter, that Caitlin wasn't mine. That everything I'd built was based on lies. Biology isn't everything. Letitia set down her cup. My boys are adopted. Jason and I couldn't have children, but they're ours in every way that matters. Their conversation continued through afternoon rounds, where Abraham watched Letitia with her young patients. Her compassion was evident, but so was her strength. She didn't sugarcoat difficult news, but she delivered it with genuine empathy. You're good with them? he commented as they left the pediatric ward. Children deserve honesty, she replied, even when it's hard. Maybe especially then. Over the following months, their professional collaboration grew into friendship. They consulted on complex cases, combining their expertise to save lives that might have been lost to either of them working alone. Dr. Mansfield watched their growing connection with satisfaction. During a particularly challenging surgery they performed together, she observed their seamless teamwork from the gallery. They move like they can read each other's minds, a resident whispered. Lourdes smiled. That's what happens when trust and respect come before everything else. 3 years passed. Abraham stood at the window of his new office at Metropolitan General, now decorated with photos of himself and Letitia at medical conferences, their blended family at graduation ceremonies, and most recently, their wedding day. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Troy Calderon entered, holding a letter. Westbrook Academy's new board wants you as a trustee, Troy said. They're implementing ethical oversight guidelines, want your input given. Everything that happened, Abraham took the letter. Interesting timing. Pete Wiggins gets out next month. And Rebecca? 2 more years, with restitution payments. Abraham set the letter down. Caitlin sent another letter last week. Wanting to meet. Troy raised an eyebrow. And some chapters need to stay closed. Abraham's phone buzzed. A text from Letitia about their foundation's latest pediatric case. Others are just beginning. Later that evening, Abraham and Letitia sat in their home office, reviewing applications for their children's medical foundation. Photos of her sons, now his stepsons, playing baseball decorated the walls alongside their medical degrees. Connor got accepted to medical school. Letitia mentioned, sorting through papers. He wants to be a cardiac surgeon, like his stepdad. Abraham smiled. As long as he knows it's his choice. No expectations, unlike some people we know. Her tone was gentle. I got a letter from Westbrook Academy today, he said. They want help preventing future scandals. Are you going to accept? Abraham considered the question. Maybe it's time. Use what happened to protect others. You're not the same man who lost everything 3 years ago, Letitia observed. You're stronger. We're stronger, he corrected. This foundation, our family, our work, it's all built on truth this time. The next morning, Abraham sat down to write his response to Westbrook Academy. Through his office window, he could see the hospital chapel where he'd once prayed over a daughter he thought was his. Now he said a different kind of prayer, one of gratitude for second chances and real love. As he finished the letter accepting the trustee position, his office phone rang. Another emergency case, another life to save. He grabbed his coat, heading for or where Letitia would already be scrubbing in. They worked seamlessly together now, their personal and professional lives intertwined in ways he'd never imagined possible during those dark days 3 years ago. In the surgical lounge after the successful operation, Abraham found a letter in his locker, the latest from Caitlin. Unlike the others, this one would remain unopened. Some betrayals broke you, but others broke you free. He'd finally learned the difference. That evening, at home with Letitia and their sons, Abraham watched his new family share stories around the dinner table. Connor talked excitedly about medical school plans while his younger brother debated the merits of different residency programs. You're smiling, Letitia observed quietly. Just thinking about how loss can lead to finding something real, he replied. Something true. Later, as they prepared for bed, Letitia asked, any regrets? About Caitlin? Abraham considered the question carefully. I regret that she lost her way. That Rebecca's lies cost her a father. But I can't regret moving forward. Sometimes healing means accepting that not every broken thing can be fixed. But some broken things come back stronger, Letitia added, squeezing his hand. Abraham nodded, thinking of their foundation's work, their blended family, their shared mission of healing. Everything they'd built together was based on choice, on truth, on mutual respect, not obligation or deception. Some betrayals break you, he said, echoing words he'd repeat many times in the years to come. And others break you free. The key is knowing the difference. Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the grounds of Metropolitan General Hospital's new pediatric wing. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, the Wilkins Roman Foundation Center for Children's Cardiac Care. Inside, Dr. Abraham Wilkins, now 58, stood before a gathered crowd at the center's 10th anniversary celebration. A decade ago, he began, his silver hair catching the light. This foundation was born from a belief that every broken heart deserves a chance to heal, whether it's physical or emotional. In the front row, Dr. Letitia Roman Wilkins squeezed her husband's hand. Their years together had only deepened the connection that began in those dark days after his divorce. Her sons, now accomplished doctors themselves, sat beside her. Connor having followed Abraham into cardiothoracic surgery, while Marcus had chosen pediatric oncology. Through this center, Abraham continued, we've treated over 10,000 children who couldn't afford specialized cardiac care. But today, I want to share a different kind of story about healing. The room fell silent as Abraham pulled out a worn envelope. 3 months ago, I received this letter from the Rockland Women's Correctional Facility. It was from my ex-wife, Rebecca. A murmur rippled through the audience. Even after a decade, the scandal remained part of the hospital's lore. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. Dear Abraham, I'm writing this from my prison cell, where I've spent the last 7 years contemplating the magnitude of my betrayal. The doctors say my cancer is terminal, 3 months, maybe 4. Before I go, I need you to know the truth about everything. The money we stole from Westbrook parents didn't just go to Pete's gambling debts. We were running a sophisticated investment scam, targeting wealthy families through their children's education. Pete would identify vulnerable mothers during parent-teacher conferences, and I would befriend them at school functions. We destroyed lives, Abraham, not just yours. Pete committed suicide in his cell last year. He couldn't live with what we'd done, but I need to live long enough to make amends. I've provided the FBI with details about every scam, every victim. Some of the money might be recoverable. Caitlin visits me sometimes. She's a different person now, harder, more cynical. The trust fund you set up for her education remains untouched. She says she doesn't deserve it. Your kindness in providing for her education, despite everything, shames me more than my prison sentence. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that losing you, losing the life we had, wasn't worth any amount of money or excitement. The woman I was then seems like a stranger now. The nurses here know about your foundation. They say you and Letitia are doing amazing work. I'm glad you found happiness. It proves what I learned too late, that love built on truth lasts, while lies poison everything they touch. I'm sorry, Abraham, for everything. Rebecca, back in the present, Abraham folded the letter carefully. Rebecca passed away last month. In her final act, she helped recover millions in stolen funds, which her victims' families are finally receiving. In the audience, Wendy Bartlett, now Westbrook Academy's superintendent, dabbed at her eyes. The scandal had eventually led to her promotion and the school's complete reformation. Under her leadership, Westbrook had become a model of ethical education. But this story isn't about revenge or justice, Abraham continued. It's about the choices we make after betrayal. Do we let it break us, or do we let it break us free? Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, retired but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly. She had watched Abraham rebuild his life, had introduced him to Letitia, had seen their love grow from shared pain into something beautiful. Through this foundation, we've chosen to transform pain into purpose. Every child we save, every family we help, is a testament to the power of starting over. The screen behind him displayed photos of their work. Children before and after surgery, families reunited, lives transformed. Among them was a recent picture that caught everyone's attention. A young woman in a white coat, her features hauntingly familiar. My daughter Caitlin, Abraham's voice softened, graduated from medical school last month. She's beginning her residency in psychiatry, specializing in helping children cope with family trauma. We're rebuilding, slowly. On honest ground this time, the revelation caused another stir. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged renewed contact with his former daughter. She works at a clinic across town, he continued. Different hospital, different specialty. We see each other at medical conferences sometimes. Small steps, but real ones. Letitia stood, joining her husband at the podium. Life isn't about the families we're born into or the lies we're told, she added. It's about the truths we choose to live by. The ceremony continued, but the story wasn't finished. Later that evening, in their home office, Abraham and Letitia reviewed files of new cases while their grandchildren played in the next room. Connor's twins and Marcus's daughter filled the house with the kind of honest laughter that only children could provide. Did you tell them about the other letter? Letitia asked softly. Abraham nodded, pulling out another envelope. This one was from Pete Wiggins, written days before his death. Dr. Wilkins, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The guilt finally won. Prison gives you too much time to think about your sins. I want you to know that Caitlin was the only good thing that came from all our deceptions. She may be my biological daughter, but you were her real father in every way that mattered. The way you provided for her education, even after everything we did. It showed me what true fatherhood means. The money is hidden in offshore accounts. Rebecca knows the details. Make sure it gets back to the families we hurt. I'm sorry. Not that it matters now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caitlin stood in the doorway, still in her hospital scrubs. At 27, she carried herself with a guarded professionalism that spoke of hard lessons learned young. The children's group therapy program you sponsored, she said, it's helping. One of my patients finally opened up today about her parents' divorce. Abraham nodded, careful to maintain the professional distance they'd established. That's good to hear. I have some ideas for expanding the program, she continued. If you and Letitia have time to discuss it, maybe over dinner next week? The invitation hung in the air. Another small step toward healing. We'd like that, Letitia answered warmly. After Caitlin left, Abraham stood at his office window, watching her walk to her car. The security lights caught the silver threads in his hair, reflecting in the glass. You never told me what was in Rebecca's final letter, Letitia said quietly. Abraham touched the pocket where it rested. She wrote it to Caitlin, actually. Asked me to deliver it when I thought the time was right. And is it? He thought about their cautious reconciliation, the careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Soon, maybe, when she's ready to hear that her mother finally understood the difference between love and possession. In the next room, their grandchildren's laughter mixed with the sound of Connor teaching his twins about heart valves using a toy medical kit. The future of their foundation, their family's legacy of healing, played out in miniature. You know what I learned? Abraham said, turning to his wife. Some betrayals do break you. They shatter everything you thought you knew about love and trust and family. But if you're lucky, if you're blessed, they break you free to build something stronger. Something real. Letitia took his hand, her wedding ring catching the light. And the key is knowing the difference? No, he smiled, watching their blended, beautiful family through the door. The key is being brave enough to try again. To believe that truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable lies. In his desk drawer, one last unopened letter waited. Rebecca's final words to the daughter whose life had been built on lies. Someday, when the foundations of their rebuilt relationship were stronger, Abraham would share it with Caitlin. But for now, they would continue their careful dance of reconciliation, building trust one honest moment at a time. After all, they had learned the hardest way possible that real family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, about forgiveness, about the courage to face truth and the wisdom to know that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing. Outside, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the hospital grounds, nature's reminder that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Inside the Wilkins Roman home, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the love they had built, Abraham and Letitia held onto their hard-won truth, that betrayal's greatest gift is the freedom to discover what loyalty really means. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
The pain radiated from every part of my body as I lay there, the steady beep of a machine piercing the fog that surrounded my thoughts. Slowly, it dawned on me. I was in a hospital. Judging by the level of pain, something terrible had happened. Disoriented, I tried to piece together the last thing I could remember. but my mind was a blank canvas. It felt like trying to grasp smoke. I had no idea what had happened to put me in this bed, but I figured I'd start with the basics. What year was it? 1969. Who was president? Nixon. What was my name? John Stapleton. How old was I? 49. Those details came to me easily, but the rest? Nothing. My body screamed at me with every shallow breath, but the emptiness in my mind was even more unnerving. What had happened to me? Why was I here? And why couldn't I remember? Okay, I have some basic parameters in place which meant my mind was still working. Now let's try some recall. What memories could I pull up? As I lay there, I saw mental flashes of my brother Jack and me during the Depression gathering coal that had fallen from the trains so that we could have heat during the winter. I remember my paper route and the fact that my family was so poor during the Depression that all the money my brother and I made we turned over to our mother, just so we could put food on the table. My mind continued to flash pictures, and I recalled that we were having dinner when we found out Pearl Harbor had been bombed. I also recalled enlisting in the Army on January 2nd, 1942. I was 22. Memories started cascading from my mind at that point. Basic training in Louisiana, shipping over to England, more training, and then June 6, 1944. I was a sergeant by then in charge of a squad. The beach was my first real taste of combat, and I wished with all my might that it would have been my last. Most of us made it through that day, but in the following months, I lost all of my original squad except Jack Murphy, a farmer with a wife and 2 kids from Pennsylvania. Jack was my best friend and more like a brother to me than even my own flesh and blood. We fought through the hedgerows in Normandy, at the St. Lo breakout, and all across France. With each guy we lost Jack and I drew closer together. We thought that we might just get through the war safe and sound, but then came the Huertigan Forest. During the winter of 44, we came up against a well-entrenched and still dangerous enemy. The woods were treacherous and the body count began to rise as we pushed our way through. We had felt before the Huertigan that the war was nearly won, but the Germans soon debased us of that notion. Our battle was eclipsed by events in the Bulge where Hitler had managed a powerful counterattack, but the Huertigan was every bit as desperate and deadly. In the 90 days that the battle lasted, the U.S. Army had about 24,000 combat casualties, with another 9,000 men suffering trench foot or exhaustion, so that had to be pulled from the line. My war changed just before Christmas of 1944. My squad was sent to recon an area in front of our lines to determine enemy positions and firepower. It was felt at G2 that the Germans might have been pulling back, and they needed to know. My 7 men, including me, set out to scout the line in the early hours of December 20th. We had gone nearly a quarter of a mile and were spread out when the early morning was shattered by a loud bang as an MG-42 spit out 1,200 rounds per minute. My men hit the ground, but I noticed that Murphy had fairly been cut in two by the Kraut machine gun. I called out as loudly as I could, "Keep down and give me suppressing fire." With the rest of the squad pumping lead in the direction of the gun, I moved out to the right, hoping to outflank it. The problem with outflanking is that you never know how many men the enemy has on their flanks, or where they might have another heavy weapons emplacement for covering fire. This morning, I got lucky. I soon found they had only one flanker, and he was an old man, a leftover from the First World War judging by the medals he was wearing. He never knew what hit him as I squeezed off a round from my Garand and dropped him. I moved up on the gun, which was still spraying lead at my men, and lobbed a grenade into the pit. The sound was loud in the crisp winter air, and I moved up to ensure that the crew was dead. As I watched, one soldier stirred and moved with a look of fear creeping over his face when I jumped into the pit. I was not in my right mind, as I now only wanted a little payback for my best friend's life. The Kraut was wounded, but not too badly, and called out gently, "Hilf." He must have seen something horrible in my face as he began to squirm in an effort to escape from me. I just looked at him and thought, this bastard killed my friend? His eyes grew wide with fear as I pointed my Garand at his face, and in a pleading voice he kept saying, "Neen, Neen." Finally, he must have realized the futility of what he was saying as his face took on a calmer look, even though the fear was still evident, and in a quiet, calm voice simply said, "Warham?" It was the last thing he ever said as I pulled the trigger, sending a 30.06 round through his skull. When I shot, I seemed to come to my senses again, as I realized the kid I shot couldn't have been no more than 16. I rifled through his pockets and found his sold butch, which contained all his personal information. Much to my dismay, the kid had been in the army only 10 days. In late 44, the Germans were hoping that all the training the Hitler Youth gave them would suffice to stop the enemy. When one of my men, Kaminsky, came up to the gun trench, I remembered he spoke some German. Without looking at him, I asked, "Ski, what does Warham mean in German?" His answer would haunt me for the rest of my life when he flatly replied, It means why. The war ended for me a month later when I got shrapnel in my leg, which took me out of combat. I left the battlefield, but the battlefield never left me. I came home in 45 with some souvenirs of the war and a permanent limp. My family had arranged a welcome home party for me, and that's where I met Becky, my future wife. Becky had worked with my brother at Curtiss-Wright Aircraft during the war, and they had become friends. They had dated, but they seemed to lack the spark that transforms friends into lovers. It was definitely not that way for us, as I hit it off with her immediately. Becky was what I needed, young, beautiful, and full of life. When I looked into her sparkling green eyes, I felt that all my sins had been forgiven. I wanted her to be with me till I died, and I asked her to marry me 1 month to the day after I met her. To my great joy and surprise, she agreed. Time moved quickly, and I was discharged from the Army, newly married and moving up in the world. I got a job expediting orders at Bethlehem Steel and became a productive member of society. The only problem I had was the dreams I could not shake. That kid in the forest and the word Warham plagued me. I felt guilty over the fact that I had murdered a boy, but I never spoke of it and kept it bottled up inside of me. In 1947, we had our first and only child, a boy we named Jack after my friend, Jack Murphy, who died in the Huertigan Forest. Over the years, the one thing that my both wife and son learned was to not ask me about the war. I wouldn't talk about it because I couldn't. I never let them know what hell was like and hoped they would never find out themselves. Jack grew up to be a strapping young man who wanted to get into the military in the worst way. I told him not to join the Army as Vietnam was going strong by 1966. However, just like me, he didn't listen and became a chopper pilot. He died in combat during the Tet Offensive in 1968. With our son's death, my marriage seemed to decay. Becky withdrew from me, and I could not get her to let me back into her life. Somehow I think she blamed me for Jack's death, as I had never tried to stop our son from enlisting. Her contention was that by me not telling our boy about the war, I had inspired him to enlist to find out for himself. She would continually snap at me, and civil words between us became a rare thing indeed. I knew that she was grieving for her lost son, but so was I. Blaming me for his death was lubricious, but there was no stopping it. We both needed each other, but instead we were both intent in driving the other away. Nearly a year went by, and still we were antagonistic to each other. The only normalcy in my world by then was my job, and then it went away. In the summer of 1969, my department was eliminated by Beth Steel. I was given a severance pay for my 24 years of loyal service and simply let go. That day, I came home early for the first time since we had been married. When I walked into the house, I expected Becky to be shocked, but instead it was me who was shocked as I heard the sound of passion emanating from our bedroom. As I walked down the hall, I felt a white-hot anger building in me that I had not felt since Murphy's death in 44. When I looked in the bedroom, my eyes were assaulted by the vision of my naked wife in bed with the next-door neighbor's son who was home from college. She was calling out God's name, but somehow I didn't think she was praying. Without thinking, I turned from the deceitful scene I was witnessing and went to the garage. Finding the trunk I had bought after the war to store my Army mementos in, I brought it down from its perch and put it on the floor. Even though I had not looked in the trunk since 46, I still kept the key on my key ring and with quivering hands unlocked it. Pulling up my old uniform, I found it wrapped in a German flag, a P-38 pistol. Along with the gun, I found its clip, and even the original 8 rounds that had been in the weapon when I took it from a German officer I had shot. Loading the rounds in the clip, I slipped it into the grip and pulled the slide back. Walking back through the house, the sounds had gotten louder, if anything, and by the time I was stepping inside of my bedroom, I was greeted by the sight of my wife and her lover. They were both oblivious to me until I hit the lever that allowed the slide on the P-38 to slam home with a resounding click. The noise from the gun echoed loudly in the bedroom, and they both stopped and looked over at me. The boy fell out of my wife as he rolled over onto his back with a frightened look on his face. Becky was also shocked, but I think it was at the expression on my face as I moved quickly around the bed and brought the pistol up to the boy's face. Becky was screaming, "Stop!" but it was too late. I felt my finger tightening on the trigger, and with a rage inside of me, I was going to end this whole charade. It was then that I looked into his eyes, and they were the same as that German kid I shot in 44. In that minute, I knew I would not kill again, and with a slow final gesture, I brought the gun down and away from his face. The room was absolutely silent as I said in a sad voice, looking over to my wife, "Warham?" Not expecting any answer, I turned and let the gun drop to the floor as I left the house. As I was leaving, the boy broke into tears and Becky was calling my name, but I just didn't care anymore. I walked out and got into my car, and without a backward glance left my life behind. Somehow in my days, I returned to the one place where years ago I felt hope for my future. It was a bar in the northern section of town with the grand name of the Excelsior. When I had gotten off the train returning home in 45, a group of us, discharged soldiers, stopped in to have a beer. I remember how life seemed to be limitless for us because the war was over. We all had hopes and dreams then. Now mine were pretty much shattered. In 1969, the train station was long gone, but the bar still remained. The neighborhood had become disreputable and downtrodden, but almost on autopilot I went into the bar. The decor and clientele had changed greatly since the 40s, but the solid wooden bar was still the same. Feeling like I had found an old friend, I sat and ordered a beer. The beer became 2, and then 3 as I sat and tried to figure out where my life had gone. I had lost everything: my friend, my son, my job, and now my wife. By the time the bar was closing, I was feeling no pain, but I was not in a good mental place. As I staggered from the bar, I noticed a movement in the shadows as someone approached me. As I looked up, it was a young man holding a gun on me. His voice was nervous and clipped when he said, "Give me your money, old man." Now. I looked from the gun to his face and replied, "No." Somewhere in my drunken mind, I had determined that I had had enough. First it was the army telling me what to do, then my employer, then my wife, and now this punk. No, now it was time to make my own destiny, and since I no longer really cared what that was, it was easy for me to refuse him. The fact is, you are only scared if you have something to lose, and since I had already lost it all, I had no fear. The punk was confused but obstinate. "Give me your money now, old man, or die." I only smiled at him, which seemed to disconcert him even more. "Go ahead, kid. Pull the trigger." The panic was evident in his voice as he ordered me again. "You think I'm messing with you, a hole? Give me the money." I shook my head no and replied in a flat monotone, "Screw you." The explosion was loud and bright, and the pain inside of my body felt like my organs had spontaneously combusted into flame. Mercifully, the pain was brief as it was quickly replaced by darkness as I felt myself sagging down onto the street with the life draining from my body. And that brought me back to the hospital room and its beeping monitor and searing pain. Apparently, I had not died, and in fact, from the amount of pain I was enduring, I was very much alive. I wanted to open my eyes, but seemed unable to accomplish the task. I was feeling myself starting to slip into that dark pit again when I felt a soft caress to my face and a voice that was familiar to me whispering in my ear, "Please come back to me, John. I'm so sorry. I was messed up in my mind, darling." I was lonely and flattered by his attention and let myself be coerced, but I never meant it to turn out this way. "I love you, my husband, and always will. We have lost so much, John. Don't let us lose each other. Come back to me, my love, and give me a second chance. I know now just how much you mean to me." At this point, I felt warm water on my cheek and the sounds of Becky's sobbing echoing in my mind. I tried hard to pull myself up from that dark pit wanting to take me down, and with a great effort managed to open my eyes to find Becky's face very close to mine. At first, she seemed unable to comprehend that I was looking at her, but then she jumped up and started screaming for the doctor. Within a few hours and close observation by the nurses, I seemed to stabilize, and the chances of relapsing back into a coma were remote. Finally, when all the action died down, we were alone, and Becky came over and hugged my face to hers, apologizing again for her actions and blaming me for our son's death. I was still mad at her, but I also still loved her and didn't want to lose her. We really talked for the first time since our son's death and discovered things about each other we didn't know. I finally opened up about the war and the things that I did and the demons that still plagued me. Becky told me about her grief and how lost she felt, and finally how she needed someone to blame for his death and wrongly lashed out at me. She also told me about the boy she had made love to, how he had been at home for the summer and came on to her when her self-esteem was at its lowest. He had seduced her, and knowingly she had allowed herself to be taken. She really seemed conflicted by what had happened, and it scared her. I was still mad at her for allowing herself to fall under his spell, but I had already begun the process of forgiving her. We shared a long marriage and the death of a son. We needed each other for support and had both forgotten that. By the time she had to go home, we both realized that we still belonged together, and that was where we had to start rebuilding from. When I got home from the hospital, she had redone our bedroom so that it was nothing like when I had found them together. We healed and moved on, and life did get better. I managed to get a job again working for an insurance agency in the spring of 1970, and we developed a new appreciation for each other. Forgiving and forgetting came hard, but we both achieved it, and our love held us together. Nobody knows how much time we have on this earth, and nobody should spend that time in the useless pursuit of anger and revenge. My wife and I moved on and had a pretty good life together after that. Did we fight? Definitely. Did we have relapses? Yes, sometimes when you least expected it, the memories all came back and the anger with it. However, just like a fire, it had to be put out and forgotten. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Today, we have a story of a 63-year-old man who transformed to an alpha male from a docile husband as he finds his wife's infidelity. I'm here to share a story that unfolded about 2.5 years ago, a tale that shook the very foundation of my family. It's not about my husband and me, for we've been happily married for 14 years. Instead, the unfortunate events I'm about to recount involve my parents, a 59-year-old woman, and a 63-year-old man. They had been blissfully married for over 38 years, creating a life filled with love and shared adventures. After retiring to Arizona 3 years ago, they embraced a lifestyle of exploration, traveling from October through April and spending the warmer months with family in Utah. My parents owned a picturesque home along the river and a new diesel truck with a camper, and our family always looked forward to their visits. My husband had even set up full RV hookups on our 16-acre property, complete with electricity, water, and septic connections. Life was, by all measures, idyllic. But then everything changed last Thursday. In their Arizona community lived a woman named Josephine. To me, she exuded an air of discomfort, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. Loud, obnoxious, and a fan of partying, she seemed like an odd match for my mom, who typically enjoyed a quiet, social drink only occasionally. My suspicions grew, but my mom assured me that Josephine was harmless, possessing a heart of gold. Despite my misgivings, my mom and Josephine became fast friends, and even some of her other friends warmed up to Josephine's boisterous personality. It was a red flag, but my concerns fell on deaf ears. Little did we know that this friendship would unravel the tapestry of our family's ideal life, tarnishing the role model marriage my parents had built for my brother and me. The story I'm about to unfold is a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that affairs and betrayal can happen at any age, and sometimes, it's not just the young who succumb to forbidden romances. Explained that Josephine and Jenny were going to continue their evening, but she felt tired and wanted to call it a night. Dad, ever the understanding husband, obliged and brought her home. However, this is where the tale takes an unexpected turn. As Mom settled back into our home, a heavy air of discomfort lingered. She seemed distant and preoccupied. When Dad questioned her about the sudden change in her plans and the extended nights out, Mom hesitated. Finally, with a mix of guilt and anxiety, she confessed. It was a revelation that shattered the image of the perfect marriage my parents had cultivated for over 3 decades. She admitted to being involved in an affair, not with just anyone, but with a man significantly younger than her, Josephine's friend, a so-called young simp. The news hit Dad like a ton of bricks. He listened in disbelief as Mom unraveled the forbidden romance that had developed during those supposedly innocent happy hours. The belly tingles and the excitement of a forbidden liaison had entangled her in a web of deceit, and the consequences were already taking a toll on her health. But what happened next was beyond anyone's expectations. Dad, a 63-year-old man, revealed a side that none of us had seen before. He didn't react with anger or despair. Instead, he calmly absorbed the shock, processing the betrayal with the composure of a true Sigma male. The revelation hit our family like a sudden storm, leaving devastation in its wake. As Mom cried out her confession to Dad, he held on to his composure, absorbing the shock of her betrayal. The very foundation of their 38-year marriage crumbled in an instant. That night, as Mom clung to Dad, pleading for forgiveness, he remained stoic. He instructed her to take a shower, and despite her pleas to share the bed, he firmly refused. The night was long, filled with Mom's repeated attempts to talk and Dad's insistence that they discuss matters in the morning. By 5:30 a.m., Mom finally succumbed to sleep, only to wake up at 8 a.m. and find Dad gone along with his camper. Unbeknownst to her, he had quietly moved his belongings overnight, symbolizing his decision to separate from her. Despite the decades they spent together, Dad was resolute in his response to her infidelity. Dad's professionalism in handling the situation was astounding. He had left without disturbing Mom, utilizing the sliding door to the patio to move his clothes and personal items into the camper. Mom, desperate and confused, called him repeatedly, only to receive a text declaring their official separation as of 6 a.m. on April 9th, the very morning she woke up to an empty bed. The realization of the divorce shook Mom to her core. In a final call, Dad calmly repeated his decision to divorce her, stating that she would hear from his attorney once he had one. He hung up, leaving Mom in a state of disbelief and despair. As if fate had a cruel sense of irony, Dad reached out to Jenny's husband, the same Jenny who had accompanied Mom and Josephine on their fateful outings. He informed him of Mom's infidelity, and in a twist of events, Jenny's husband locked her out of their house. Currently, Jenny is staying with Josephine as they navigate the fallout of their choices. Dad then called my brother and me, breaking the news with a heavy heart. Initially, we thought it was a cruel joke, but as the reality of the situation dawned on us, tears flowed uncontrollably. The perfect family we had known was now shattered, and the pain of betrayal lingered in the air like a bitter taste. It's been an agonizing week since the bombshell revelation shattered the picture-perfect life my parents had built over 40 years. Mom's world has unraveled, and she's been on a desperate quest to find Dad, who, rightfully so, sought solace away from the chaos. As my brother and I grapple with this heart-wrenching situation, the dilemma we face is profound. Dad explicitly asked for privacy, and we've respected that. We know his whereabouts, but have chosen to keep it from Mom. We stand firmly by Dad, recognizing him as the victim in this painful saga. Yet, our concern for Mom is overpowering. She's in a state of complete disarray, driving hundreds of miles, fueled by anxiety and despair. The fear of her physical and emotional well-being is keeping us up at night. The question gnaws at us. Should we disclose Dad's location to ease Mom's torment? Deep down, I believe we shouldn't. Dad's plea for privacy should be sacrosanct, and revealing his location might erode the trust he has in us. But we also recognize the urgency to ensure Mom's safety. One tentative solution that has crossed our minds is to share Dad's general location with Mom, assuring her that she won't go to him. It might offer her some peace without violating Dad's trust. Yet, the potential damage to our relationship with Dad looms large. It's a delicate balance between supporting Mom and respecting Dad's boundaries. We grapple with the gravity of the situation, torn between the needs of both parents. An update on Mom. Last night, she was in the St. George area, continuing her quest for Dad. I managed to convince her to drive up to our house and spend a few nights with us. She agreed, and as she's expected to arrive this afternoon, I'll keep everyone updated. Your tips and support mean a lot during this difficult time. The past 10 days have taken a dramatic turn, unveiling a series of unfortunate events that have left my family reeling. Mom, arriving at my home in a state of distress, looked visibly unwell, expressing her discomfort. We allowed her to rest, but an alarming cry from my youngest daughter drew me to the bedroom where I found Mom in excruciating pain, doubled over and unable to move. Swiftly, my husband and I rushed her to the emergency room, where she displayed symptoms of a serious infection, possibly a urinary tract infection. The doctor initiated tests and treated her for severe dehydration. Shockingly, the root cause of her agony was traced back to a sexually transmitted disease contracted during the recent affair. The silver lining was that the STD was curable with antibiotics. However, after 48 hours in the hospital, her condition showed no significant improvement. Concerns escalated when the doctor speculated that she might have a drug-resistant form of the STD, a growing concern in recent years. Mom was put on a potent cocktail of antibiotics. After 5 challenging days, her fever finally broke, and her condition stabilized, leading to her discharge from the hospital. However, this ordeal has taken a severe toll on Mom, physically and emotionally. Throughout her hospital stay, she repeatedly inquired about Dad, desperate to know if he had reached out to check on her. Truthfully, he hadn't, not even once. I've been the intermediary, providing him with daily updates. My family and I have been a constant presence by her side during her hospitalization, but her emotional state has taken a hit. Now at home with us, she seems to be physically recovering, but her incessant texts and calls to Dad reveal the deep emotional turmoil she's grappling with. The frustration in her voice was palpable as she uttered those words, expressing the hurt and confusion that had taken root in the aftermath of a 40-year marriage seemingly unraveling. It struck a nerve, and in a moment of heated anger, I lashed out, unable to contain the turmoil within. If you didn't frick around, none of this would have ever happened. This is all your fault. You ruined our family. The truth was harsh, laid bare for her to confront. But the immediate regret that washed over me compelled a swift apology. She crumbled, tears streaming down her face, and I couldn't help but pull her close, enveloping her in a hesitant embrace. Our conversation unfolded for over 2 hours, a tumultuous exchange that revealed the sordid details of her indiscretions. The man she had been involved with, a 28-year-old construction worker, became the face of the betrayal that had shattered our family. The circumstances surrounding their interactions were unsettling, the presence of his friends, the intimacy shared between them while others engaged in similar activities. I pressed for more details, unable to fathom the reality of my own mother's actions. The discomfort etched across her face was palpable, a clear indication that she wanted to bury the topic. Yet, I forced her to confront it, questioning how she could do such a thing to Dad. Her answers were feeble, laced with regret, and she struggled to articulate the motivation behind her actions. Disgust permeated my thoughts as I absorbed the shocking revelation. Never in my wildest dreams did I envision my own mother entangled in such a sordid affair. She confessed that she honestly didn't know why she succumbed to the advances, regret washing over her as soon as the actions began. Grateful for her confession, my thoughts turned to Dad, imagining the potential tragedy if she had remained silent, unknowingly transmitting the STD to him. The gravity of the situation weighed heavily, and I found myself torn between understanding her regret and grappling with the sheer repugnance of the whole affair. As Mom clings to the belief that Dad will return, an impending revelation awaits her on Saturday, a detail I am privy to but cannot share. Dad, with unwavering resolve, plans to serve Mom with divorce papers at my house. His intention is clear: to provide her with the support of family as he delivers the final blow to their once unshakable union. The upcoming days hold the promise of further turmoil, as the aftermath of betrayal and the pursuit of closure unfold. Over 13 months have passed since my last update, and it's now June 2022. People have been inquiring about the situation with my parents, prompting me to return to this platform. Here's the current state of affairs. Mom and Dad are officially divorced, a reality that still feels surreal. Dad, a man of strong convictions, couldn't forgive Mom for her infidelity, severing all contact with her. The only encounters they had post-separation were during the divorce hearings. Dad's decision to cut ties swiftly was surprising, but it reflected the depth of his hurt and the irreparable damage to their relationship. Despite the emotional turmoil, he ensured a fair financial distribution, treating Mom more than generously. While writing this pains me, I comprehend Dad's feelings of betrayal and the need to distance himself. Mom, on the other hand, now resides in a small apartment near us. Gone is the once idyllic life on the river in Arizona with boats, jet skis, and a camper. Instead, she's in a town close to her daughter, living in a modest apartment. The stark contrast under the magnitude of what she sacrificed for a fleeting moment of thrill, a temporary happiness that turned out to be a bitter betrayal. The aftermath unfolded differently for each parent. Post-divorce, Mom's health rapidly declined, leading to hospitalization for bronchitis, dehydration, malnutrition, and severe depression. A 3-day hospital stay resulted in prescribed medication for her mental health, stabilizing her mind to some extent. Unfortunately, a potential case of lupus emerged, likely triggered by the stress of the divorce and the loss of my father. The doctor emphasized the impact of severe stress on the immune system, exacerbating lupus-like conditions. Mom received specific recommendations to strengthen her immune system and manage stress actively. Her journey to recovery over the past 6 months has been marked by improvement, but she's not the same woman she once was. The toll of the ordeal is evident in her physical and mental well-being, a stark reminder of the lasting consequences of choices made in a moment of weakness. Mom, once a pillar of strength, is now a shadow of her former self. The craft superstore job I secured for her, through a friend's managerial position, has become a lifeline. She's excelling there, earning commendations as a wonderful employee. Despite this glimmer of purpose, the grim reality is undeniable. She's lost the luxuries she once enjoyed, reliant on prescription medications, battling stress that threatens to overwhelm her. She's now living in a small apartment near me, a stark contrast to her previous life. Enough about Mom. Let's shift the focus to Dad. He's wasting no time reveling in his newfound freedom as a nomad, exploring the country in his camper. In the past 6 months, he's forged a connection with a woman, and things seem to be getting serious. Although I've urged caution, considering the recent divorce from Mom, he appears content. This woman is a young YouTube vlogger with a passion for travel, sharing common interests with Dad. They've been camping across the country for months, and despite the age difference, their relationship seems genuine. Dad reassures my brother and me that he has no plans to marry again, a sentiment echoed by his girlfriend, who had a failed marriage and isn't eager to repeat the experience. They found common ground in their love for nature and the outdoors. Expressing gratitude for the guidance received during this challenging time is essential. The thoughtful responses and interest in my family's situation have been heartening. As a loving and hopeful daughter, I share this update with a mix of relief and anticipation for what lies ahead. And now, a brain teaser to ponder. If you were in Dad's shoes, would you forgive a nearly 4-decade partner for a sudden lapse in fidelity? Could you overlook the transgression as a shadow over an otherwise sunny marriage? Or would it be a deal breaker, igniting a thirst for revenge? The complexities of forgiveness and revenge, emotions entwined in the aftermath of betrayal, make for a compelling mental exercise. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.
On Monday evening around 6:15, the doorbell rang and, to my surprise, it was my cousin Ralph. I rarely get home before midnight, so I assumed he forgot my schedule. After inviting him in, I got him a beer and we watched Monday Night Football while chatting. Ralph seemed disappointed that my wife, Lois, wasn't home, but she had called earlier to say she'd join us after work with her coworkers for a drink. I eagerly awaited her arrival. Lois and I hadn't been lovemaking for over 3 weeks, as she often claimed fatigue or headaches. Ralph left around 8 o'clock, and I stayed up, dozing off in front of the TV, a rare occurrence for me. When I woke up, Lois's car was parked outside, but she hadn't come to fetch me for bed, which struck me as odd. Finally, we were lovemaking, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she frequently found reasons to say no. It made me question my worth as her partner. After repeating this pattern for weeks, Lois asked if she felt too loose, a question that puzzled me. I assured her she was perfect for me, though I knew she wasn't being truthful. From my perspective, there was a moral dilemma. Honesty about physical compatibility was essential, but it needed to be approached delicately. Despite my love for Lois, doubts lingered even after she accepted my proposal, leaving me uncertain about the future. Returning to my attempts to awaken a slumbering Lois for some affection, her groggy voice muttered, "Oh, it's you." My disappointment at finding her asleep in bed instantly ignited into furious anger. "Who did you think it was? You miserable cow?" I exploded, unable to contain my frustration. "What's going on? Who are you with?" Storming off the bed, I snatched my shorts from the floor and stormed downstairs. Grabbing a beer, I retreated to the patio to cool off and process the tumultuous encounter. It seemed like she was interested at first, but when she realized it was me, she declined. Her tone was dismissive, like, "Great, him again." As I stared at the night sky, I questioned for the first time if her claims of spending time with friends were genuine. Doubt crept in. Then the realization hit me. How would I afford a detective to uncover her secrets? It seemed she could read my mind, yet showed no remorse. It was as if she thought, "Oh well, he knows now." Feeling restless, I opted to watch TV instead. Finding a blank tape, I popped it into the VCR and settled in to watch last week's NCIS. The video revealed everything. I paused it and quietly checked upstairs, finding Lois already asleep. Returning downstairs, I resumed the tape and witnessed my wife with my cousin Ralph in the bedroom. The camera angle suggested it was hidden in the closet, capturing their actions. The betrayal stung deeply, and questions flooded my mind about how many times this had happened. Suddenly, a stranger's voice broke the silence. "What did I do to deserve this?" Lois's panicked exclamations drew my attention. She frantically dialed a number, urging someone to answer. Seizing the phone, I confronted her, causing her to recoil in fear. "Why don't you retrieve the tape, Ralph?" I demanded, warning him to stay away from me in the future. With a vow to attend family gatherings, I vowed to cross paths with him someday, promising it would be his worst day ever. I slammed the phone down, glaring at Lois. "Thanks to you and my idiot cousin, I don't need a private investigator. You handed me all the evidence," I spat. Retrieving the tape, I kissed it and played it on the TV. Lois trembled, asking, "What will you do?" "What do you think? I'm divorcing you," I snapped. "I don't want a divorce," she pleaded. I scoffed. "Why not? You clearly don't care about me." Ordering her to leave, I hid the tape and made coffee, compiling a to-do list for the morning. Though our state lacked a no-fault divorce law, infidelity could sway the court's property division. Discovering her infidelity surprised me, but at least I hadn't added her to the house deed. As I made the list, I heard Lois leave. I pondered the rapid shift from love to hate and focused on what I could do next, grateful for the resources available online. As I headed to my room, I noticed the blank tape I had left on the TV was gone, and I smiled, hoping Lois had taken it without watching it. Back at my computer, I secured my finances, transferring most of our joint account funds to my personal savings and canceling joint credit cards, leaving my own intact. Satisfied with my efforts to protect myself, I slept soundly. The next morning, I promptly left for the bank, securing a safe deposit box in my name only, and transferring valuables from the one Lois accessed. At the office, I instructed my secretary to intercept any messages from Lois, informing her of our impending divorce. With each action, I asserted my independence, ready to face the challenges ahead with determination. Myra informed me that Alan wanted to meet me urgently upon my arrival at work. Upon reaching his office, Shirley, his assistant, directed me straight to him. "You're late at a bad time," he remarked as I entered. "You need to be on the next flight to Atlanta. Morgan's company is refusing to sign a new contract, and I need you to handle it." I expressed my hesitation, explaining my need to deal with Lois, who posed a threat to my home in my absence. Alan assured me, offering to handle the legal matters through his trusted lawyer, Bert Ellsworth, whom he recommended highly. He arranged for me to contact Ellsworth en route to the airport. With tickets reserved by Shirley, I reluctantly accepted the assignment, recognizing its importance despite my personal concerns. Rushing home, I packed and secured the house before heading to the airport. En route, I contacted Ellsworth, who provided advice and assured assistance. After navigating airport security, I checked in at the Delta counter and waited in the boarding area for my flight to Atlanta. As I mulled over the lawyer's advice, I spun a tale to Ellsworth about Ralph's threats to Lois, concocting a story to justify the restraining order. "If he tries anything, I'll knock some sense into him," I falsely assured Ellsworth. "I overheard Lois saying she'd love to watch," I added, layering the deceit to keep Lois at bay until my return. Despite the falsehood, I felt justified, considering Lois's own deceptions while entertaining Ralph and others. Ellsworth assured me of the restraining order's feasibility, but warned of a hearing in 10 days to finalize it. My trip to Atlanta proved fruitful as I swiftly resolved the contract issue, earning Alan's praise. He informed me of the locksmith's visit and his son-in-law's plan to safeguard the house. During my Atlanta trip, I made courtesy visits to 2 other clients before boarding Flight 720 home. Checking my phone, I found multiple missed calls and voicemails, mostly from Lois. Deleting her messages, I listened to Ellsworth's urgent plea, urging me to call before matters escalated. Ellsworth's voicemail confirmed he secured a protective order that afternoon and would serve it on Lois at her workplace the next morning. Grateful to Alan for the recommendation, I thanked him. Returning home at midnight, a sheriff's deputy approached, asking for ID. Showing my driver's license, I thanked him for watching the house, assuming he was Alan's brother-in-law. He handed me a ring and keys, explaining that all locks in the house used the same key. Lois had visited twice, getting angry when denied entry. Inside, I noticed the answering machine blinking, but exhausted, I turned off the phone and slept. In the morning, I checked the answering machine and found all messages were from Lois, repeating the same plea to call her. "Too late, honey," I thought. At work, Myra informed me of Lois's persistent calls, but assured me she hadn't connected with her. I thanked her, expressing gratitude for her support. Myra joked, "You say that to all the girls," as I kissed her forehead. In Alan's office, I updated him on the situation and thanked him for his help. Alan asked about my plans next. "Get on with life. Maybe find someone who'll put up with me," I replied. Alan encouraged me, saying things would improve over time. Returning to my office, I focused on work. I called Ellsworth, who confirmed the papers would be filed by 10 and offered to serve them to Lois before lunch. I agreed, and Myra invited me to lunch. We went to Tricacci's, where she offered support, knowing the challenge of divorce. "I could use some cheering up," I admitted. Myra handed me a paper, saying, "Here's today's cheer-up attempt." Glancing at it, I found a list of names. "What's this?" I asked. "A list of girls interested in you now that you're single again." Flipping through, I noticed a few surprises. Liz Fisher from accounting. Isn't she engaged? She was, but she kicked him out after catching him cheating. "Do you really think she's into me?" I asked. "I know she is. She once said she'd snatch you up if you were single," Myra replied. I scanned the list again. 7 names, and besides Mary, 2 others might catch my interest. "So, you're saying they're all interested?" "I've heard them express interest in you," she confirmed. I grinned. "I noticed your name isn't here." "I considered it, but given the circumstances, I'd rather not," she explained. "Why?" "Because besides being married, you've just begun your divorce due to your wife's cheating," she reasoned. "I figured dating a married woman wouldn't be on your mind." "You gamble? I thought you and Harold were solid," I remarked. "We were, until I found out he was cheating with his secretary. Instead of divorce, I'm opting for kindness, she admitted. You're wrong. Even knowing you're married wouldn't stop me. You should have put your name, I said. You'd be perfect for me right now. Now I know you're joking. I'm far from perfect, she laughed. That's where you're mistaken. You have one characteristic they lack, I teased. And what's that? She inquired. You're married, and they're not. You'll have to explain that, I remarked. Right now, I don't need an emotional connection. It'd be too easy to get involved with the three on your list I'm interested in. You're already engaged and seem keen on retaliation with your husband. If we got involved, it'd be strictly physical, I explained. Are you serious? She asked. Absolutely, I affirmed. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't pursue a married woman, but if she's free, that's a different story, I clarified. What about a long lunch then? She suggested. Not today, but tomorrow I'm free, I agreed. It's a date. Hypocritical? Not at all. According to Ellsworth, once Lois received the divorce papers, we'd legally part ways. At 2:45, Lois called. Knowing she'd likely been served, I answered. What do you need? I asked bluntly. Why can't I get into the house? What's with the divorce? Why are my credit cards not working? And the protection order? She demanded. Just out of my mind, I replied tersely. Your cards are inactive because part of divorcing a cheating wife involves canceling her credit cards. And you can't enter the house because you're no longer living there. And I don't want you in, I explained. You need to stop this, Dave. Losing half your assets over a little fling, it meant nothing. I love only you, Lois pleaded. I see it differently. You cheated, making you a strumpet in my eyes, which is why I filed for divorce, I retorted. We should discuss this face to face, Lois insisted. Surprisingly, I agreed. Where and when? She asked. Not tonight. I've barred you from the house, I replied. You can't keep me out, she protested. Actually, I can. The house is mine, not yours. You'll retrieve your belongings with a court official present to ensure fairness, I stated firmly. Let's just talk it out, she suggested. Not here, I insisted. You're being unreasonable. Where then? Lois demanded. Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Angelina's restaurant. We'll have privacy, I proposed. Ending the call, I pondered whether Lois truly believed her excuses would sway me. Sadly, the answer was yes. Why wouldn't she think I was naive? I let her off the hook for years. That evening, I hit the landing strip lounge after work, hoping for a pick-me-up. It was open mic night, so I hoped for some laughs. I sat at the bar, and Karen greeted me. The usual, Dave? She asked. I usually get a PBR and some good company, I replied. I've got a keeper, Karen said, pouring my beer. Then a woman took the stage for stand-up comedy. A surveyor stopped by Will's farm in eastern Minnesota and announced he had some bad news. I have discovered that your farm is not in Minnesota. It is actually located in Wisconsin. Will let out a huge sigh of relief and said, That's the best news I've gotten in a while. I was just telling my wife this morning that I don't think I could stand another winter in Minnesota. She laughed and continued. The New York City Department of Education reports that only 26% of the city's 3rd through 8th graders passed the English exam. But on the other hand, they're too bad at math to realize how bad it is. 2 more comedians followed her act, and I departed feeling notably uplifted compared to my arrival. Maybe there's some truth to the old adage that laughter is the best medicine. The next day at work, as soon as I settled at my desk, Myra reminded me of our lunch date. Despite a hectic morning, Myra and I headed out for lunch at 11:30. En route to the Marriott, I asked if she truly preferred eating before our plans, to which she chuckled and quipped, Being entertained on a full stomach slows me down a tad. I checked us in under the alias Meister and Mrs. Ralph Tomlinson, a fitting nod to Lois's affection for donkeys. Once in the room, we wasted no time getting lovemaking. The remainder of the day flew by, and it was soon time to rendezvous with Lois at Angelina's. Arriving ahead of her, I secured a booth in the quietest corner, far from the dance floor. Ordering my usual, I settled in to await her arrival. When Lois showed up 5 minutes later, she looked as stunning as ever. Normally, her presence would stir certain desires in me, but the knowledge of her actions in our marriage quelled that impulse. As she sat down, she ordered her customary Cosmo, visibly irritated when I requested separate checks. Sipping my beer, I prompted, All right, Lois, you called this meeting, so what's on your mind? Honestly, Dave, you could have been more courteous given the circumstances. Lois, you're lucky I haven't torn you apart. Speak up or I'll walk out. With a sigh, she said, You're blowing things out of proportion, Dave. We don't need to divorce. I love you, always have, always will. My affair with Ralph means nothing to me. Yes, it happened, but it was just physical. Most of the time, I can't stand him. He's never posed a threat to you or our marriage. Why did you prioritize him over me if he means nothing to you? I didn't. Yes, you did. Reflect on the past 6 months. How often have you been there for me? Mostly reluctantly, doing favors. Think about the last 3 weeks. I've heard your excuses every night and stayed out of it while you've been enjoying yourself elsewhere, and you call that love, being exclusive to me? It hasn't been that brief. It certainly has. For 3 weeks, you've been avoiding me, and when you finally say, I'll be lucky to have you home, you just go straight to bed and sleep. When I tried to initiate something, you were all for it until you realized it was me. Remember that, Lois? Remember that? Oh, it's you. I'm tired. Leave me alone. That's all, Lois. Oh, you said it all. And then that tape was the last straw. Then why even tell Ralph these things? Because Ralph likes hearing it. He has some pathetic need to feel superior to you. I tell him these things to boost his ego. There's nothing wrong with you in bed, Dave. You've always satisfied me. Then why seek pleasure with other men? It's not other men, Dave. It's only Ralph. So you don't consider it cheating on me if it's just Ralph? That's not what I meant. Regardless, whether it's one man or many, enjoying another man's company while married is cheating, no matter how you spin it. Answer me this. Before seeing that tape, would you say our marriage was good? Maybe okay, but not great. I dated Ralph before we got married, and it didn't affect us. Did you entertain my idiot cousin before we tied the knot? Yes, I did. Then why marry me at all? Because I love you, Dave. I don't even like Ralph that much. Why are you enjoying yourself with him? Because he provides something you can't. Look at it this way, Dave. Think of Ralph as just assisting you with me. You're crazy if you think you can convince me of that. If that's all you want to discuss, then we're finished. I began to rise from my seat, and she interjected. You'll never persuade Dave that infidelity is acceptable. You lack any evidence to support that claim. Don't forget, I have the tape you and Ralph generously made for me. Are you certain? Absolutely, I affirmed, walking away from her. As I made my way to the door, a grin crept onto my face. Apparently, she hadn't checked the tape she took from home, unaware it was blank. Just as I reached for the car door handle, I heard the click of her heels and turned to find Lois half walking, half running in her high heels. I marveled at her speed in them. Hastening towards me, she pleaded, I need to get into the house, Dave. I need my clothes and belongings. Though I knew I was being insensitive, I felt entitled to it. Have your lawyer contact mine to arrange it, I replied, sliding into the car. Rolling down the window, I bid, Goodbye, Lois, and drove off as she called out, Wait, Dave, just a minute. I could have allowed her to follow me home and retrieve her things without inconvenience. It wouldn't have inconvenienced me. But at that moment, I was thinking, forget her. If she didn't already have a lawyer, it would take her a day or two to find one. Since it was Thursday, I wagered the soonest she could secure one would be Monday, with another day needed to organize her return to the house. By then, I'd have packed all her belongings in garbage bags, showing little care in the process. If I were lucky, she'd have to take everything to the dry cleaner or laundromat before using them. Was I a bit resentful toward Lois? Not really. My relationship with Lois was smooth sailing. I slept soundly that night. On Friday, I had another lengthy lunch with Myra. As a particularly busy period drew to a close, Myra inquired about my weekend plans. Upon learning I had none, she proposed, Would you like to spend the weekend with me? I'd love to, but how will you keep it from your husband? He's going fishing this weekend. He packed up this morning and will leave straight from work. I'm at your disposal from now until noon on Sunday, if you need me, that is. Silly girl, let's see. Dinner and dancing tonight, then play at home. Saturday morning wake up and more playtime. Dinner and dancing Saturday night, followed by more play at home. Sunday morning, play until noon, then brunch. Sound good? Sounds great, but how about we skip the dancing and focus on playing? That won't do. Your energy never seems to fade, and mine needs a break sometimes. All right then, your plan it is. After returning to work, I informed her I'd pick her up at 7. Pack for the weekend, I instructed, since you won't be returning until Sunday. Upon arriving home, I discovered Lois hadn't wasted any time searching for a lawyer. Upon entering the bedroom to change, I noticed part of Lois's dressing room was bare. Most of her belongings were gone. Curious, I investigated how it had happened and found a broken window in the family room facing the patio. Though I couldn't prove Lois was responsible, I derived some satisfaction from spotting blood on the glass shards indicating she might have injured herself climbing in. I located a glass company in the Yellow Pages, scheduled an appointment for the next day, and decided to leave the mess until morning. With my decision made, I headed upstairs, showered, and dressed for my outing with Myra. We dined, danced, and indulged in drinks. Although we retired at 11, sleep eluded us until 3, leaving me utterly exhausted. After Myra had her fill of me, I set my watch for 9, anticipating the arrival of the glazier between 10 and 12. However, Myra woke me at 7:20 in a delightful manner. While awaiting the glazier, I tidied up the broken glass, completing just as the glazier arrived at 10:10. By 10:40, the repairs were finished, and by 11, Myra and I were enjoying a late breakfast at Tricacci's. Following our meal, I inquired what Myra would like to do next. "Just relax and cuddle. That's all I want," she replied. And that's precisely what we did. Buoyed by our spirits, by 5, we opted to order pizza and continue our leisurely day. We decided against closeness on a full stomach, opting instead to lounge on the couch and watch TV for an hour or two. However, our TV viewing was abruptly interrupted mid-program. Sunday morning dawned, bringing with it the realization that I would have to return Myra to her husband. This realization sparked a thought which I voiced over pancakes at the Village Inn. "How much time do we have left?" I inquired. "What do you mean?" Myra responded. "When are you planning to leave me?" I clarified. "Why do you think I'll leave you?" Myra questioned. "From what you mentioned about flirting with your husband," I explained. "I was under the impression you were just casually flirting, not involved in a serious relationship," I added. "Maybe, but it wasn't my intention. Typically, the men I encountered became possessive, wanting me to leave Harold for them. However, none of them could match Harold's lifestyle," Myra disclosed. "I couldn't fathom trading a comfortable home in a nice neighborhood for a one-bedroom apartment, wondering if we could afford bills each month. Plus, they weren't any better in bed than Harold, and they were messy," she continued. "And I always wore my wedding rings," Myra admitted. "I fail to see the logic. You sought out attention knowing they were aware of your marital status," I remarked. "True, but I wasn't seeking a replacement for Harold. I just wanted retribution. Holding on to them, if they were skilled in bed, didn't imply emotional attachment," Myra confessed. "Admit it. If they started stalking me knowing I was married, do you think I could ever trust them if I made the relationship permanent? So I'm just another sleaze? Don't be ridiculous. Of course not. I've been working for you for over 5 years now, and in all that time, you've never once flirted with me. Consider what brought us here. Love. I pretty much gave you an open invitation. You made it clear that you'd never pursue a married woman, and you didn't. I offered, and you had the good sense not to refuse. If anything, I'll be the one to end it. I can assure you of that. If it does happen, it won't be anytime soon. Do we have time for one more before I have to take you home?" She grinned, and we drove off. As I retired Sunday night, I felt like one of the happiest men in the state, maybe even the neighborhood. On my Monday commute to work, I reflected on my relationship with Myra and realized it couldn't continue. At least not in the same manner as over the weekend. I was suing Lois for infidelity, and if she hired a competent lawyer, one of their first moves would be to find something on me to use as leverage. If I got caught with Myra, Lois could counter, but I wasn't willing to go without her for the duration of the divorce proceedings. I had already endured enough deprivation while married to my unfaithful wife. Upon arriving at work, I summoned Myra to my office, explaining the dilemma and seeking her input. "I have a couple of ideas, but I'm not sure if they're feasible," she began. "Tell me, and let's see," I encouraged. "You have 3 uncomfortable customer chairs here. You need to replace them with a comfortable couch so visitors can sit comfortably," she proposed. "I can arrange that," I agreed. "Then you often stay late at work, so naturally I'll need to stay late to assist you. After we install the new couch, you'll leave, and I'll wait for 10 or 15 minutes to allow anyone watching you to follow, ensuring they won't see me leave," she suggested. "That should work," I concluded. "Here's another option. I'll leave for lunch. Before you head to the hotel, book a room and call me with the room number. Upon arrival, take the elevator to the 2nd floor where the conference rooms are, then use the stairs to reach the designated floor. However, we can't do this often. Attending too many conferences may arouse suspicion. To ensure I'm seen at a conference, hang a Do Not Disturb sign on one of the conference room doors before anyone arrives via the stairs. But ultimately, they'll need to witness us together. If we arrive and depart separately, we'll be fine." I instructed Myra to schedule the conference for the next day and then sent her off to work. With a busy day, I didn't get around to ordering the couch until around 4. Without waiting for approval, I ordered and paid for it myself. At 5, I called Myra into my office and informed her she needed to inform her husband that she would be working late on Thursday. The couch will be delivered around noon. "How did you arrange everything with Ahern and accounting so quickly?" she inquired. "I handled it myself. No need to involve them," I replied. Seeing no one around, Myra kissed me as the door to the office was open. Then she remarked, "I was hoping we wouldn't have to wait until Thursday." "Don't forget about tomorrow's conference with the Ajax guys," I reminded her. "Shoot! How did I forget?" she exclaimed. Despite the encounter with Lois parked in the driveway when I arrived home, I remained in good spirits until I spotted her. Positioning her car in the middle of the driveway prevented me from accessing the garage. To allow her to leave, I parked accordingly. As I stepped out of my car, she approached me, stating, "We need to talk, Dave. Things are escalating." I brushed past her, heading to her car. Opening the door, I reached for her purse, tipping its contents onto the seat. After counting the money and pocketing it, I tossed the purse back atop the pile. "You still owe me $14 for the broken window. We have nothing more to discuss," I asserted. "Dave, I love you, and I don't want a divorce. We can work through this. It doesn't have to end," Lois pleaded. "No, Lois, there's no way we can salvage this, especially after learning you betrayed me before we even married. It's over between us," I declared. Lois was deflated. "I had hoped you'd see reason, but I knew deep down you wouldn't. If you're set on divorce, I'll fight you. I won't accept infidelity. I know the laws here, and I won't settle for a 70-30 property split," she warned. "I'm sorry you won't hold yourself accountable for what you did to me, but infidelity remains a fact. You'll have to prove it, Dave, and you can't. It'll be your word against mine, and I'll deny it vehemently. I'll claim you're attempting to swindle me out of my fair share of our property. You might even face consequences for it. You seem to forget I have visual evidence of your infidelity with my cousin." "No, Dave, I haven't forgotten. I grabbed that tape as I left the house and promptly destroyed it. It's your word against mine, and without proof, you'll lose." "You destroyed it. Ralph will never forgive you. He needed that tape desperately. He might even lose interest in you for destroying it. Can you grasp that I don't care about Ralph? Yes, I desired what he offered, but I don't require it. I need you." I shrugged, stating, "You still owe me $14 for the window," then distanced myself from her and entered the house. She persisted relentlessly. She pounded on the door and rang the bell for a solid 10 minutes before finally departing. Watching her retreat down the driveway, I smirked. Clearly, she destroyed the tape without verifying its contents. A surprise awaited her. I wanted her to engage a lawyer and contest the divorce. I desired her to accrue debt, spend thousands on legal fees, only to discover I still possessed the tape, rendering her expenditures futile. I slept peacefully that night. My Tuesday conference call with the Ajax representatives went smoothly, leaving me in high spirits upon returning home from work. Wednesday wasn't too shabby either, especially when Myra suggested a quick encounter on my desk at day's end. After ensuring everyone had left, I acquiesced. Upon completion, I reminded her of her late shift on Thursday. En route home, I opted to stop by Landing Strip Lounge, my favorite restaurant. Unbeknownst to me, it was hosting an open mic night, making it a challenge to find a vacant seat. Eventually, I secured a spot at the bar. I happened to be present when Bobby Denton passed the microphone to a trailer repair mechanic employed by Triple T Sales and Service in Franktown. This individual was quite intelligent, holding degrees in both electrical and mechanical engineering. One day, while driving home, he heard a radio commercial that struck him as a blatant falsehood. Contemplating this, he sketched a plan for a lying robot upon returning home. After refining his blueprint, he constructed the robot in his basement workshop over a span of 6 weeks. When completed, he tested it in his living room, coincidentally when his 14-year-old son arrived home 2 hours tardy. Inquiring about the delay, the man's son claimed he had lost track of time while playing cards with friends. With a lull in the proceedings, I finished my beer and departed for home. The following day brought 2 positive developments. Firstly, my lawyer informed me that Lois's legal counsel had reached out, indicating her intent to contest the divorce. This news brought a smile to my face. Secondly, my black leather couch was delivered. Opting for leather was strategic, anticipating the inevitable stains it would endure. This foresight proved beneficial as Myra and I left a few stains on it later that afternoon. The subsequent weeks flew by, marked by frequent encounters with Myra, mostly on the couch after work. However, on 3 occasions, we utilized the conference room, acknowledging the superior comfort of the bed over the couch. During this period, Lois called me almost daily, expressing her need for me and insisting that I couldn't prevail. She suggested we accept the past, move forward together, and forget everything. Although I could have ended these calls by changing my phone numbers, I derived a perverse satisfaction from informing her she was wasting her time. Meanwhile, Ellsworth and Lois's lawyer were occupied with legal matters. I hoped Myra's lawyer billed by the hour, as I had negotiated a flat fee with Ellsworth, indifferent to the duration of the proceedings. Ellsworth was aware of the tape's existence, yet he never disclosed it to Lois's attorney. They negotiated with the other attorney, proposing that if I changed the grounds for divorce from infidelity to irreconcilable differences and agreed to an equal property division, Lois would cease her resistance. I instructed Ellsworth to decrease the split from 70/30ths to 65/35ths, knowing she wouldn't accept. Ellsworth informed me that he must notify the opposing party about the tapes before presenting them to the judge, as failing to settle beforehand would anger the judge. I authorized Ellsworth to use his discretion, as that was what I was compensating him for, right? It seemed Lois had someone tailing me, or at least that was my suspicion. I suddenly noticed a stranger nearby, seemingly appearing wherever I went. It might have been my paranoia, but then again, maybe not. Another week elapsed, and Ellsworth called. Lois and her attorney wished to meet. I instructed him to arrange it and inform me of the time. He later notified me, Friday at 10 in the morning. I arrived early at 9:30 and discussed matters with Bert. We decided to have the tape present at the meeting, but I wanted to toy with Lois one last time. The meeting commenced with the usual banter. Lois denied the infidelity accusations, claiming I was being unreasonable. Then I interjected, reminding her of the tape she and my cousin made. "No, I don't," she retorted confidently, aware of the lack of evidence to support my claim. "I'll make you a deal, Lois. If you sign the papers now, I'll agree to a 60-40 split. But you have only 2 minutes to decide. If not, I'll leave it to the judge." "I won't agree, Dave. You have no proof," Lois replied stubbornly. "Sure, Lois, I have a tape of you and Ralph," I stated confidently, anticipating her reaction. And just as I hoped, she became enraged, blurting out, "Damn it, Dave, I already told you I destroyed the damn tape." "Oh, so you admit to infidelity and destroying evidence?" I remarked, watching her eyes widen in realization. "No, that's not what I meant," she backtracked. "Never mind, Lois, I offered leniency, but your stubbornness, as usual, led you to reject it. Let the courts decide." Lois's lawyer then interjected, "If you indeed possess evidence, you better reveal it now." I gestured to Ellsworth, and as he moved to press the play button on the TV VCR positioned at the table's end, I stated firmly, "This is your final opportunity, Lois. I'm willing to settle for a 60-40 split, but once he presses play, the offer is rescinded and we proceed to court. Screw you, Dave. You've got nothing on me." With that, Bert pressed play, and I rose, declaring, "See you in court, Lois," before exiting the room. Before I even left the building, my phone rang. It was Bert. "They're interested in making a deal." "No thanks. I offered her an out, but she refused, so full steam ahead." My actions only escalated Lois's phone calls. I disconnected the house phone, and Myra knew not to pass on Lois's calls to me, leaving my cell phone as the only means of contact. I kept the same number to toy with Lois, finding amusement in the numerous unanswered calls from her. As for my personal life, Myra was providing more than enough excitement. 3 days after the meeting with Lois and the attorneys, Myra approached me saying, "We've got a problem, a major one." I panicked, fearing her husband had discovered our affair. "How serious is it?" I inquired. "Pretty serious. Harold needs to fly back to Ohio for some issues regarding his parents' inheritance. He'll be gone for a week." "So, what's the dilemma? How do we manage a week together?" I pondered for a moment before suggesting, "Simple. You leave work half an hour before me, drive to my place, park a block away, ensure all curtains are shut tight, and when I return home, we'll have our time. In the mornings, I'll leave for work, potentially drawing any pursuers with me. After waiting a brief period to ensure I'm in the clear, you'll head to work. We'll repeat this until the weekend, when we'll devise another plan. What about a weekend plan like this? I keep up the routine, but on Friday evening when you return home, we stay indoors the entire weekend. Do you think you can handle spending 2.5 days with me?" "What I'm unsure of, dear, is whether I can survive 2.5 days with you. We won't know until we try. So we went through with our plan and I made it through the weekend. However, once it was over, I found myself feeling a bit down, especially when Myra returned home to reunite with her husband. I had grown accustomed to Myra's presence. She provided good company and we got along well. Yet, deep down, I knew that once my divorce was finalized, I would be seeking a replacement for Lois. I valued the idea of marriage and longed for a fulfilling relationship where I could fall asleep in the arms of a loving partner who would be there in the morning. While I could envision having that with Myra, she never explicitly indicated that she would leave Harold. I sensed that she was content with him, aside from his occasional mistreatment, and was prepared to remain with him as long as she could reciprocate. Recalling the list that had ignited our affair, I mentally reviewed it. There were 3 men on that list, none of whom seemed suitable to be my spouse. 2 of them smoked, a habit I detested due to growing up in a household where both my parents were heavy smokers. Liz, from accounting, the only non-smoker among them, was indeed attractive, but I considered her too young for me. Our age gap suggested we might lack sufficient common ground. A brief encounter in her office, where she was listening to rap music, a genre I disliked, reinforced this belief. While entertaining the idea of a fling with Liz might be tempting, I doubted we could sustain a lasting relationship. These reflections occupied my mind during my Monday morning commute. Once at work, I found myself swamped with tasks, too preoccupied to dwell on personal matters. In fact, I was so occupied that I had to decline when Myra popped her head into my office asking if we were going to lunch. Right before I wrapped up my workday, Bert Ellsworth called. He mentioned that Lois was eager to resolve the matter. I understand your stance on bargaining, but offering her a 60/40ths deal to sign immediately might be wise. Infidelity typically influences asset distribution, but with 2 out of 7 divorce judges being women, they often lean towards a 50-50 split, regardless of grounds. We might end up with one of those judges. Settling now could be in your best interest. After about 30 seconds of contemplation, I instructed him to propose a 65-35 TRSS deal and gauge her response. During the downtime, Myra entered my office, requesting some time on the couch since she missed her extended lunch break. I granted her request. The following morning at 10 o'clock, Ellsworth called to report that Lois had agreed to the 65-35 offer. He mentioned she would arrive on Wednesday at 5 to sign the papers and requested a brief meeting with me. Although I saw little purpose in it beyond giving me another chance to confront her, I wanted to conclude matters swiftly to avoid further inconvenience to Myra. I informed Bert that I'd be available at 2 o'clock to accommodate her request. We convened in the conference room and I took a seat, waiting for her to speak her piece. Recognizing my silence, she took a deep breath and expressed, "I don't want this, Dave. I know you may doubt it, but I love you. Perhaps we can find a way to reconcile and stay together." "Absolutely not, Lois. Not after discovering the extent of your infidelity. Let me be frank. If it were a fleeting affair, I might consider reconciliation. Suppose you had a series of regrettable encounters before our marriage, followed by years of fidelity until one resurfaced, leading to a brief affair. I might have been able to forgive that, but a long-standing affair before we even committed to each other? No chance whatsoever. Lois, there's no resolving this. You lavish love on the man you claim to barely like, while the one you profess to love can go weeks to months without it. It's futile, Lois. It just is. Is that all? Can't you please give us a chance, Dave? I can't, Lois. I'll never trust you again, and I refuse to live like this." I rose and made my way to the door. Pausing, I added, "You're an attractive woman, Lois, so I doubt you'll be single for long. If you find someone, I hope he treats you as poorly as you've treated me." With that, I exited the room and headed to the landing strip. Taking a seat at the bar, Karen served me a PBR and asked, "Where have you been, handsome?" "Dealing with a divorce and not in a very social mood," I replied. "I'd stop in for a beer or 2 and unwind." "So, does that mean I'll have a chance to charm you now?" she teased. "I thought you were content with your boyfriend all these years." "Ha, I was, until I realized he wasn't what I thought." Deciding I'd had enough, I signaled for the bill. As Karen returned with my change, she flashed a smile and said, "When your divorce is finalized, don't forget about me, all right?" "I can manage that. Take care," I replied, leaving in high spirits. Karen's interest in me was unexpected. Once Lois signed the papers, it was all settled. Despite awaiting the final decision, I felt liberated, free from the fear of being watched. Myra and I could abandon our clandestine meetings. Around 10, she entered my office asking about lunch plans. Yes, I'll leave around 11:20 and book a room, I informed her. However, she responded, that won't be necessary anymore. Lois signed the papers yesterday, so we don't need to worry about avoiding something that might not have happened. At 11:30, we left for the Marriott. As the door to room 403 shut behind us, we leaped onto the bed. While we dressed, Myra posed a question. What now? What do you mean? I countered. I mean, now that you're free. This took me by surprise, but I quickly formulated a response. As long as you want me, honey, I'll stick around. But eventually, I'll seek a wife. I enjoyed being married. What qualities would you seek in a wife? She should be attractive, love me, have the strength to tolerate me, and be a decent cook. I can cook, she offered. I paused, realizing her true intention. In response, I stated, if you meet the criteria, I'll prioritize your application. But there's a catch. I won't engage in bigamy. She looked puzzled for a moment until it clicked. She beamed. Don't worry, love. Harold's days are numbered. Then, a concern crossed my mind, evident in my changed expression. Myra noticed and inquired, What's wrong, kid? What's on your mind? We've reached a point where we don't need to hide things from Lois, but now we have to conceal matters from Harold while you navigate your divorce proceedings. I may be mistaken, but I doubt it's necessary. I'll present him with a choice: infidelity or irreconcilable differences. I possess ample evidence of his infidelity. If I threaten to expose him, he'll likely opt for irreconcilable differences to protect his career aspirations. Harold aspires to climb the corporate ladder, aiming for a vice presidential role. However, the CEO and several board members are devout Christians. His chances may diminish if his affairs come to light. While it might inconvenience me for a week or two in a motel, we can handle that, can't we? Myra's strategy unfolded as planned, and she wasted no time executing it. Following my suggestion, she arranged a meeting with Ellsworth for Friday. She requested Bert to draft 2 sets of documents, one citing infidelity and the other irreconcilable differences. Just before the bank closed on Saturday at 11:45, she withdrew half of the checking account, all her savings, and 4 of the 6 CDs from the safe deposit box. Returning home, she gathered Harold's belongings he had left in pursuit of gold, loaded them into her car, and checked into a motel. By 3 o'clock, she returned, prepared dinner, uncorked a bottle of wine, and while dining with Harold, revealed her awareness of his affairs, backed by PI reports on 3 of them. She asserted she had reached her breaking point and intended to divorce him. She detailed her financial actions, offering to relinquish her share of the house, which exceeded her bank loan. Presenting him with divorce papers, she outlined his options and set a deadline of 10 o'clock Monday morning for his decision. Departing with a smile, she left the dirty dishes for Harold. As anticipated, Harold phoned her on her cell, opting for irreconcilable differences. On Wednesday, they convened in Bert's office, where Harold signed the documents. Myra opted to remain at the motel over the weekend to let the situation settle. Later, she moved in with me, and we planned to cohabit until our divorces were finalized, then wed. However, this posed a dilemma. Myra excelled in her role and wished to retain her job. Yet, our company prohibited relatives from working together. While we could both stay, one of us would need to relocate. Unfortunately, the nearest facility for transfer was 90 miles away, impractical for us. Hence, we decided to conceal our marriage. Myra retained her surname, preserving her health insurance until, if ever, we were discovered. And then Myra would resign and seek another job if she desired. She didn't really need to work, considering my substantial compensation. She checked out of the motel on Sunday and moved in with me by 3 p.m. The following 2 months passed swiftly without incident, and I began to unwind and lower my defenses. A significant error. Lois called once or twice a week, and I typically answered to dismiss her, deriving satisfaction from doing so. I should have anticipated her persistence. On a Wednesday evening, Myra and I were at the landing strip, enjoying a drink or 3. We frequented the place occasionally, not necessarily on Wednesdays, as it had always been my preferred spot. However, we were there that night to support one of the accounting girls, trying her hand at performing. We applauded Shelley's effort, but both Myra and I agreed she was better suited to her job than show business. Her routine began with a scenario where a man engrossed in reading the newspaper gets struck on the head by his wife with a frying pan. "Why did you do that?" he inquired. "For the paper I found in your pocket with Jenny's name," she retorted. He explained that Jenny was the name of a horse he bet on at the races. Apologizing, she resumed her chores. Days later, as the man watched TV, his wife punched him again, this time with a larger pan causing him to lose consciousness. Upon awakening, he asked why. "Your horse was calling," she quipped. After some laughter, the storyteller continued. An elderly couple, despite mutual disdain, remained married for years. Their arguments often resounded late into the night, with the old man threatening to haunt his wife after pass away, which frightened the neighbors, who suspected him of practicing black magic due to odd incidents. Upon his demise from a heart attack at 85, his funeral featured a closed casket. At the burial, neighbors expressed concern to his widow about his potential return. She scoffed, asserting she'd buried him upside down, confident he wouldn't ask for directions upon resurrection. "You keep your damn hands off my man, you damn strumpet!" Lois's voice cut through the air, dripping with venom. I whirled around to see her pouring a drink over Myra's head. Before I could react, Myra retaliated, splashing her own drink into Lois's face. Lois stumbled to the floor, and I wasted no time grabbing Myra and pulling her out of there. As I started drying us off with some rags from my trunk, Lois stumbled out of the door, her footing unsteady from a blow to her nose. And who was there to help her? None other than my prick cousin Ralph. I dropped the rags and yelled, "You rotten son of a cow!" and launched myself at him. He let go of Lois, who collapsed, and then he bolted. I chased him for 3 blocks before giving up and heading back to the strip parking lot. When I returned, I found Myra pinning Lois against the car's fender. Myra was screaming at her, "Get it into your stupid head, you stupid cow." "I didn't steal it from you. You threw it away, and I was lucky enough to catch it." As I approached, Myra backed away and said, "Let's get out of here. Get in the car. I need to go inside and straighten things out with Joe." I found him inside, and he assured me there was no damage. He even joked, "Next time do it during intermission so the customers have something to look at when no one is on the mic." Back outside, I saw Lois waiting for me at the entrance, but Myra was already in the car. Lois stepped towards me, pleading, "Please, Dave, give up the divorce. I'm dying, baby. I need you. I love you, and I know we can work this out." "You must be the stupidest human being on the planet, Lois," I said, shaking my head in disbelief. "Here you are, professing your love for me while your current date is the reason behind your divorce. And to top it off, you're not even discreet about it. You need to let it go, Lois. The only feelings I have for you are hate and disgust. Leave me alone." With that, I walked around her, got into my car, and drove away. Both divorces were finalized. I proposed to Myra, but she surprised me by saying, "Ask me again in a year, baby. Let's see if we're truly right for each other after living together for a while." I waited a year and proposed again, and this time she said yes. We opted for a civil ceremony at the Justice of the Peace, as we didn't want another big wedding. Lois ended up marrying Ralph, but their marriage didn't last long. It turned out Ralph had been cheating on her with several other women, one of whom gave him a disease that he passed on to Lois. While cheating on me seemed acceptable to her, being cheated on was a different story entirely. She couldn't tolerate it. 6 years after my marriage to Myra, Ralph made the mistake of attending a wedding that I also happened to be at. I kept my long-standing promise to him. It may be a while before I receive another invitation to a family celebration.